Ring. Kingdom Hearts Dark Road is fundamentally a story about being presented with difficult choices. It is a complex and somewhat challenging narrative that asks characters with an array of different perspectives what they believe to be right, and just how far they would be willing to go when following that so-called right path. When faced with danger, would they turn and run, or stand and fight? Would they choose to endure hardship and suffering in the short term, in the hopes of ultimately improving the rest of their lives? Would they be willing to take the life of an innocent, knowing that doing so would save the lives of countless people? Would they instead put the entire universe at risk, in the hopes that just one life might be saved? When our characters are presented with these impossibly difficult decisions, would they accept the burden of making a horrible choice when no one else seems willing? Do they even possess the mental fortitude to see their choices through to their conclusion? And what kind of person will they have become in the aftermath of those decisions? What part of themselves will they have had to sacrifice in order to walk down their chosen path at their proverbial crossroads? The story of Kingdom Hearts Dark Road acts as both a sequel to Kingdom Hearts Union Cross and the currently unreleased Kingdom Hearts Missing Link, as well as being a chronological predecessor to the rest of the Kingdom Hearts series. Please be advised, this video will assume you have seen the explanation of Kingdom Hearts Union Cross and will immediately discuss spoilers from that game. I will, however, give you a heads up before I discuss the events of Kingdom Hearts 3 and beyond, as I can never be too sure where in their Kingdom Hearts journey people are going to choose to watch these videos. In the climax of Kingdom Hearts Union Cross's finale, you, the playable protagonist of Kingdom Hearts Union Cross, sacrificed your freedom and life so that your friends and fellow Keyblade wielders, Ephema and Skuld, could escape the overwhelming threat of 4 near-immortal beings of primordial darkness. Ephema and Skuld's fellow Union leaders appeared to have already successfully used some special pods to travel forward through time to futures unknown, and as the doomed Daybreak Town crumbled around them, Ephema and Skuld boarded pods of their own. In the aftermath of Daybreak Town's destruction, Ephema's pod drifted among the obliterated ruins of his former home until the boy within emerged. Skuld did not appear to be with him. Hopefully her departure had occurred successfully, but either way, Ephema was left all alone. In his hands he held both a copy of the fabled Book of Prophecies and a special Keyblade called the Master Defender, both given to him by his fellow Union leader, Brain, right before departing the doomed world. Because of the Master Defender's special world-altering properties, it can be assumed that Ephema took that distinct Keyblade and used the Book of Prophecies as a guide to reshape this decimated land into the world of Scala ad Caem. And generations from now, the people that would come to inhabit this land would revere their town's founder, Master Ephema, and all that he had done. Missing Link will cover a large portion of this currently unwritten time period, so I will not speculate on the plot of that game here. However, we are being led to believe that during this time period, the playable character of Union Cross will experience some form of reincarnation, getting to live again as the protagonist of Missing Link as well, experiencing another full life in this incarnation of Scala ad Caem. Again, without speculating, we know that at some point during the second lifetime, the player will learn of a prophecy of the Child of Destiny. This prophecy seems to state that a prophesied child will save the world from darkness, that they will hail from the Destiny Islands, and that they will have the ability to connect their heart with the hearts of others. Whether or not this prophecy has any authenticity to it, the player will start to consider that a descendant of Ephema could be that destined child, and towards the natural end of the player's second life, they will take a newborn baby from their tearful but willing mother's arms and travel the corridors of darkness to the Destiny Islands to raise the child alone as his mentor and guardian. Over the years, this newborn, Xehanort, the protagonist of Kingdom Hearts Dark Road and central antagonist of the entire Kingdom Hearts series thus far, will be kept safe, shielded from darkness, and taught a portion of the knowledge and wisdom that his guardian gained over the course of their 2 lifetimes. When Xehanort was still but a child, he demonstrated the ability to see into the player's deepest, most cherished thoughts, leading the player to become utterly convinced that Xehanort was indeed the Child of Destiny as the prophecy stated. Xehanort was having dreams about people he had never seen in person before, considering them to be his dear friends and greatly desiring to one day travel to whichever outside worlds they could be found on and meet them for real. Xehanort had unknowingly connected his heart with that of his guardians, and felt a strong bond to the player's treasured friends from their first lifetime in the Age of Fairy Tales. The Union leaders, who are also unwilling pawns on the great chessboard of the Master of Masters, in his never-ending conflict with the forces of darkness. Xehanort wouldn't know any of their names, but in his dreams he would unknowingly see his own ancestor Ephema, as well as Brain, Laurium, Ventus, Skuld, noting that her hair looks just like his own mother's, and the player themselves, and this realization caused the player to weep with joy and take the young boy gently into their arms. The player held such admiration and respect for Ephema, and now he was his descendant, growing up on the Destiny Islands and demonstrating the empathetic ability to connect his heart to others. Surely, he must be the child of Destiny, as the prophecy predicted. And whether the player was right or wrong, this is what Xehanort was raised to believe, growing into an adolescent who believed he would one day leave these tiny islands that he called home behind, and realize the prophecy that he was born to fulfill. Over the years, as the player aged and reached the end of this lifetime, perhaps their protection over their charge came to an end as well, because very soon after they passed, as Xehanort awoke from yet another dream of his unknown friends, the teenager would be approached by a strange being in a cloak, addressing Xehanort as his waypoint, and providing him with a dark corridor that would lead away from these tiny isles. The stranger tantalized the youth with the choice of remaining on these islands and the quiet life and uneventful death that would surely accompany them, but venturing out into the unknown could lead to the friends that Xehanort still saw in his dreams. With only a moment's hesitation, Xehanort entered the portal, taking that first step down the dark road that would lead him ironically back to this exact moment, but also to friendship, loss, obsession, and catastrophe. The main story of Kingdom Hearts Dark Road is told across 7 episodes, which relay the tale heavily out of chronological order by blending the main plot with a series of flashbacks, flash-forwards, and obscured information to deliver its narrative. This order is of course the intended and perfect way to experience the story for the first time, allowing you to enjoy the many mysteries that the plot is centered around. But in order to actually get the best understanding of this twisting and turning tale, I will be summarizing and explaining everything that happens in chronological order. I very much enjoy the story of Dark Road. It's a compelling and rewarding narrative in its own right, and the way that it integrates the requisite visits to the various Disney worlds into that overarching narrative is particularly fantastic for a Kingdom Hearts title. But I say all of this in spite of the fact that... look, I've spent a ridiculous amount of time with the story of the mobile games. Arguably more than anyone else in the Western world, and from my exposure to this story, I can't help but feel that we are missing a couple of decently sized pieces from the middle of Dark Road. As said, there are of course gaps in the narrative that are left intentionally unexplained and are ambiguous by design, lingering mysteries that serve as prime candidates for theorization and discussion amongst Kingdom Hearts fans, as we await future titles which might grant us answers. However, I also feel that there are some gaps left unfilled because the infamously overworked and understaffed developers simply ran out of time, and were forced to take shortcuts and make compromises as they had done previously in order to release the final episodes of Dark Road by the absolute final extension to the deadline that they had been permitted. Most of these gaps are rather minor, but in the case of one pivotal moment in the story, I feel like we've potentially lost as much as entire episodes that might have further fleshed out both the antagonist and an important group of tertiary characters that the inciting incident of the story revolves around. I'm not here to entertain those particular hypotheticals though, at least not in this video. Taking the story content found within Dark Road itself as the primary source of canon, and supporting that information with supplementary material from other connected Kingdom Hearts games, I have plotted out what I believe to be the most logical timeline of Kingdom Hearts Dark Road's events, and will relay the story to you as such. Other people might disagree with my interpretation about the 1% of events that are on the more ambiguous side. That's fine. I'm happy to discuss alternate understandings of the events with my fellow fans. But I know a lot of you guys trust me with summarizing and explaining these events to you accurately, and I really don't like the thought of betraying that trust in any way. So as always, I'll endeavour to delineate between when the information discussed has been directly confirmed, and when I am filling in some blanks from the appropriate context. Again, I recommend experiencing the story in its intended order first. I have all the cutscenes available on this channel already, and I'm currently working on a fully voiced fan dub of the Dark Road cutscenes, which when it's complete, I hope will be by far and away the best way to experience this story. If it is finished by the time you watch this video, then I certainly recommend checking out that project first. But for now, we will proceed. After traversing the murky corridor and enduring a maelstrom of turbulent emotions, some of which were somehow even directed at Xehanort himself, Xehanort washed ashore in a world known as Scala ad Caem. This particular section of Scala ad Caem looks very visually distinct from the home that Xehanort left as an infant that also bears the same name. So, as of the time of writing, we cannot say with certainty if this world is the exact same Scala ad Caem that Xehanort was born in and Missing Link is set in, so I will not dwell on the mystery. But soon after his arrival, the unconscious Xehanort was taken in by the residents of this world and eventually enrolled in an academy for aspiring Keyblade Masters, and granted the ability to use a basic Keyblade alongside his fellow classmates. He formed a fast kinship and friendly rivalry with an energetic boy named Ericus, and would often enjoy matches of chess between classes. Ericus was fascinated with Xehanort's origins, a subject that Xehanort stayed very coy about, choosing to reveal almost nothing about his life before arriving in Scala, meaning Ericus stayed ever curious about what lay beyond the ocean that surrounded and encapsulated his world. Also making up their cohort of lower classmen were 5 more students named Ermod, Erd, Bragi, Ver, and Baldr, and they all studied under an older Keyblade Master known as Master Odin. Their regular classroom was the site of many lessons and friendly chess games, and everything that occurred here did so under the watchful gaze of a most ancient Keyblade, known unofficially as No Name. Very few people knew the secret purpose of this Keyblade, however, that through the eye embedded in the blade, the Master of Masters could gaze upon this world from the past, allowing him to observe countless new generations of malleable Keyblade wielders that might be useful to his plans. On one occasion, before the proper beginning of Dark Road, Ver had asked her classmates why they all wished to become Keyblade Masters. Ericus initially felt obligated to become one, to uphold the perceived family tradition, a subject we'll touch on later, but now he only wished to eradicate the darkness itself once and for all. Bragi often presented himself as being quite laid back and aloof, and in this instance merely responded that he wanted to do what's right. Erd is prudent, thoughtful, and dreamed of learning and exploring. Becoming a Keyblade Master would allow her to see all the worlds out there for herself. Baldr, a reserved and timid boy, just wants to protect what's important to him, a desire that will one day be expressed by future protagonists of the Kingdom Hearts series. Ermod is almost like the soft-spoken, self-appointed older brother of the group, and agrees with everything the group has discussed so far, as well as also wanting to uphold the greater order of the worlds. As a reminder, the Realm of Light had been cataclysmically split apart as a result of the Keyblade War seen in Kingdom Hearts Key, and the individual pieces of the realm now stood separated from each other as independent worlds in the Void of Darkness, prevented from interacting with each other ever again, lest another apocalyptic event born of conflict occur. Anyway, Xehanort wanted to see those friends from his dream again, refusing to reveal any more information to the inquiring Ericus. And finally, the cheerful and cheeky Ver refused to tell anyone else her dream, teasing the group that now that they had made theirs public, theirs wouldn't come true. In class, Master Odin would lecture the students on the ways of the world in which they resided. Though darkness and light are fundamental complementary forces of the Kingdom Hearts universe, darkness was treated as an absolute, unquestionable threat, and lectures were taught on identifying the various dark forces that inhabited their world. As Keyblade wielders and future masters, the students had a responsibility to know about the so-called dangers that lurked in both their own world of Scala ad Caem and the various scattered worlds that they would one day be permitted to travel to. On one such occasion, Master Odin taught them that in ancient times the darkness would take people as vessels, spreading far and wide like an infection among the populace, echoing the same sentiments that the Master of Masters espoused to win the trust of his disciple, Lushu, years earlier. We'll see another example of this soon, but it's interesting to note that the teachings of the Master of Masters has somehow persisted, even though it's not exactly clear who actually survived the events of Union Cross to pass that knowledge down. Though Odin seems to have knowledge of the 13 primordial darknesses of old, he informs the students that over the years, darkness and the hearts of humans became entangled. People were reshaped by their interactions with the dark beings, and now negative emotions in the hearts of people can literally birth dark embodiments of the heart's negativity, beings that have come to be known as the Heartless. The examples Odin gives of negative emotions are greed, ire, or envy, which you may recognize as 3 of the 7 deadly sins, the same deadly sins that the foretellers are named after, a point that we'll also come back to later. After studying for a set amount of time, students would be tested for the Mark of Mastery exam, a chance to show their tutor that they possess the makings of a true Keyblade Master, and it is around one of these Mark of Mastery exams that the main plot of Kingdom Hearts Dark Road takes place. Not for our cast of lower classmen that have been introduced so far, but for an older cohort of upperclassmen, also comprised of 7 students, that were a couple of years ahead of our main cast. Vidar, Vala, Vali, Sigrun, Helgi, Heimdall, and Hoda were also students of Master Odin's, and after years of studying topics such as the nature of the darkness and the importance of maintaining each world's order, Master Odin announced to the class that it was now time to undergo the rites. It is at this point that I will remind you, the viewer, that I am explaining these events in chronological order to ensure that we have the best understanding of the plot possible, and that you will likely enjoy experiencing this story far more by viewing the game in its intended order first, before watching this very spoiler-heavy explanation. Hoda had let her younger brother Baldr know that she was soon to undertake the test, that the upperclassmen were meant to travel to the worlds outside of Scarlet Kaim, and that the ones who returned will be made Keyblade Masters. This worries Baldr greatly though, and shortly after Hoda and her classmates departed, Baldr confided in his friend Ericus about his worries. For one, this test sounded very irregular when compared to a normal Mark of Mastery exam. Instead of a straightforward trip to broaden the group's horizons before the test itself, it sounded like Master Odin wasn't expecting some members of the group to make it back at all. This greatly concerned Baldr, and ever since Hoda and her class left for the exam, he couldn't help but worry that Hoda would be lost to darkness. At the mere mention of the word darkness, Ericus perked up, and Baldr apologized for bringing up a painful subject, recalling that Ericus's grandfather had once battled the darkness, resulting in an unknown fate. Ericus cuts him off quickly, stating that he isn't sure what happened to his grandfather, and reiterating that the thought that darkness could be nearby makes him nervous, and maybe hating darkness is in his blood. This is another hint at Ericus' bloodline that will likely be explored further in Kingdom Hearts Missing Link. Combining this with the earlier mention that being a Keyblade Master runs in Ericus' family, the fact that Ericus is known to eventually be in possession of the Master Defender Keyblade that was once owned by Brain, and the similarity in the appearance between the two characters, the current running fan theory is that Brain, or one of his descendants, will eventually be revealed to be Ericus' grandfather. It seems like a pretty safe bet, but I've certainly been wrong about these things before, so we should get back on track. Baldr was born much like Xehanort and Sora, as an empath that was particularly sensitive to the hearts of others. From a young age, he also demonstrated the ability to be able to see inside the hearts of those around him, and though this led him to share in the joys of his friends, it also meant that he was attuned to the darkness in their hearts as well. You'll recall that one of the main takeaways of Kingdom Hearts Are Recoded was to demonstrate that Data Sora, and by proxy, the Sora that we know and love, was capable of withstanding the hurt and pain of those whose hearts had joined with his own. Whether he intended to or not, he was helping to shoulder the suffering of his closest friends, as well as Naminé, the Sea Salt Trio, the Wayfinder Trio, and anyone whose heart he was connected to, even sometimes his enemies. Baldr would act in much the same way to his fellow Keyblade wielders of Scala, only the burdens he helped shoulder in this case were the lingering societal fears of darkness and of the unknown. These students were preached to endlessly that darkness was unquestionably evil and must be eradicated, that various forms of darkness had caused endless suffering and destruction to the realm and people of the light throughout history, and still plagued the worlds outside of their own safe home to this day, potentially lurking around every dark corner, festering in every shadow. That collective fear of the darkness and the unknown was endlessly lectured to the burgeoning Keyblade wielders and left terror in their hearts, which was all observed and shouldered by the empathetic Baldr. It was unintentionally absorbed by him, and began to combine and manifest as a darkness within his own heart. Practically all hearts had traces of darkness, but through Baldr's inadvertent actions, theirs were allowed to stay relatively pure and bright, while Baldr's heart only fell deeper and deeper into the abyss, until Baldr realized that the shadows he believed he was merely carrying for his friends had become genuine darkness of his own. When Baldr now stood beside his friends and the bright lights of their hearts, his own darkened heart would cast shadows in their wake. In his mind, it appeared that there were two kinds of people in this world, and it seemed Baldr was very different from everyone else. It was terrifying to the poor boy, because whereas someone like Sora would shoulder the pain of his friends and their struggles, he could also then turn to those same friends for support. Sora's belief that his friends' interconnected hearts were his power served as more than just poetic words. It is a literal truth and recurring motif of the series. As Sora helped others, they in turn provided him with the strength to overcome those burdens. A Kingdom Heartsified example of the real-world importance of turning to others when we need help in our own lives. That even just talking about your struggles with others can go a long way towards alleviating those burdens. But unfortunately, Baldr had no one that could help him. Who could he possibly turn to for support with this? How could he confess to anyone that he felt the presence of darkness stirring within his heart? Once again, the people of this society were endlessly preached to that darkness is the ultimate threat and must be eliminated. So I don't think it's an over-exaggeration to state that Baldr had genuine reason to suspect he would be ostracized, exiled, or even potentially executed for making such a confession. And of course, this only exacerbated the problem, because whenever Baldr would observe his fellow students and witness their mostly pure hearts, ironically unburdened through Baldr's own empathetic actions, he began to feel animosity towards them. They got to live radiant and carefree lives in devotion to the light, alongside other people that were just like them. They didn't have to suffer as he did. As time passed, the shadows that Baldr had absorbed from others combined with this internalized distaste for those people. A true being of darkness that was simultaneously an honest embodiment of Baldr's own feelings and an unwelcome foreign entity was born within Baldr's heart. The only thing the agonizing Baldr could take scant solace in was the light of his sister's heart. Even among the Keyblade wielders of Scala, Hoda's light seemed particularly bright, almost flawlessly so, and as Baldr grew ever more terrified of the darkness that was growing within him, he became increasingly reliant on Hoda's light to keep that budding darkness at bay. If he could just ignore that component of himself, suppress its existence by constantly bathing himself in the light of Hoda's heart, then maybe everything would be okay. Maybe this truth could stay hidden forever. So when Master Odin confirmed that the upperclassmen were about to undertake their Mark of Mastery exam, that they were about to leave Scala ad Caem and tour the worlds of fairy tales, Baldr again had genuine reason to panic. Master Odin seemed to imply that perhaps not all of the upperclassmen would return, which of course was troublesome enough on its own. But even if Hoda returned and was eventually named a Keyblade Master, what would happen then? Surely with her newfound title, she would leave this world and her flawed younger brother behind in her life's journey. And what fate would befall Baldr then? Who would remain to keep Baldr's growing darkness in check? What would happen when the truth was inevitably revealed? When these people eventually discovered Baldr's secret? That through no fault of his own, he was born in such a way that seemed utterly incompatible within the society in which he existed. So, to return to our explanation, as Baldr started to voice these concerns with Ericus, a boy much like his sister that was also utterly devoted to the teachings of the light, and with a heart of almost pure light to match, an almost perfect encapsulation of this society and its priorities was demonstrated. As the troubled Baldr spoke of his concerns, telling Ericus that he feared his sister would be lost to darkness, the single-minded Ericus immediately lost all focus on Baldr's strife and honed in on that word. In Ericus's own words, hatred of the darkness is something deeply ingrained in him and his entire family at the bloodline level, and that prejudice instantly took precedence over showing concern for his friend's mental health. Even though Ericus eventually did try to ease Baldr's mind, the damage was already done. Ericus had once again affirmed Baldr's fears that he would never be safe sharing this secret with anyone. Hoda was about to leave for her exam, and once she did, things would only get worse for Baldr. This being of darkness within him was born of Baldr's heart. It had a will of its own, a will that encapsulated and could act on Baldr's own most forbidden thoughts and desires. These wielders feared and demonized one of the fundamental components of their own universe, and this fear had directly birthed a being of their own terrors, a being that would in turn draw strength from that same fear of the darkness and the unknown. It could act from the shadows and prey upon the deepest, frightful recesses of the wielders' minds. And as an extension of Baldr's own heart, it both loathed those Keyblade wielders for their blind devotion to these unjust ways, but conflictingly also cared for them as comrades. But ultimately, and above all else, Baldr's darkness would surely desire to upset the status quo that forbade its mere existence. Even saying these words, trying to understand why this being of darkness is about to act in the way that it does, it makes me feel like some sort of darkness apologist, but I think that's the point. Dark Road repeatedly challenges our typical notions that so often accompany narratives with similar thematic elements, and even the majority of the Kingdom Hearts series so far. Ingrained perceptions that position the audience to, by default, support the actions of those that associate themselves with the light, no matter how destructive they might actually be, and condemn the actions of those that follow the darkness. This idea was certainly present in Birth by Sleep, a point we'll touch on later, and Riku's entire arc across the series so far is perhaps the best reminder that we should not be so quick to see the world through such a narrow lens of black and white. That there is much more to be gained on both sides by trying to understand those that you initially considered your enemy. And as the series moves into its latest saga, maybe we should get acclimated with the idea that some actions performed in the name of the light are not deemed right based on that virtue alone. When seeing things from Baldr's darkness's perspective, how could it not long for a world in which the tyranny of light, as it were, was abolished, and it had the permission to not only exist, but thrive? Against an opposition that is utterly unwilling to compromise in its stance of eradication, would the darkness not be justified in making terrible choices to ensure not only its own survival, but also forge a better life for itself and its kind? And now, with Baldr experiencing the turmoil of his sister's fate as a result of Master Odin's suspicious Mark of Mastery exam and his own uncertain future, perhaps here was a chance for the darkness to turn these desires into actions. As part of their exam and journey to explore the outside worlds, the upperclassmen arrived at the world of the Enchanted Dominion. According to the timeline of this world, which we'll address a little bit later on, the upperclassmen arrived during the nearly 16-year time period where Princess Aurora was being hidden away by the three good fairies, and the pupils soon learned that Aurora had been cursed by the evil fairy Maleficent. The classmates were of course troubled by this and wanted to help Aurora, but feared that they lacked the proper insight and experience to challenge what seemed to be the established order of this world, deciding to return to Scala Ad Caem and ask Master Odin about it tomorrow. But instead of following through with the group's apparent unanimous agreement, in the morning, Hoda silently snuck off into Maleficent's castle to deal with the Mistress of All Evil herself. Similar to Ericus, Hoda seemed to be the kind of person that believed that darkness is evil and must be eradicated no matter what. Forget about maintaining the order of the worlds. An innocent girl was suffering because of a being of darkness, and Hoda had to take action, even if she did it alone. Vali first noticed Hoda's absence and woke up Vidar to let him know. Vidar seemed concerned that going after her as a large group of 6 would risk the world's order even more, so Helgi, Heimdall, and Sigrun split off to try and find Hoda before she got hurt. Unfortunately, as said earlier, the empathetic Baldr was also gravely concerned for his sister, and the darkness within his heart was wreaking havoc on his emotions and his mind. Baldr had followed her to this world, trailed her to Maleficent's throne room, and called out to her as he spotted her. But things get slightly murky here. The way that Baldr and even the 3 upperclassmen tell this story later, Hoda was battling Maleficent in her mighty dragon form, but upon noticing that Baldr had arrived, she ran towards him to shield him with her body and was fatally wounded by a blast of cursed fire. However, I do not think that this is the truth. This important scene is shown in 3 different flashbacks, as narrated by 3 different people over the course of the game, some of whom are unreliable, and I think this has led to some confusion within the fanbase as to what truly happened here. However, I think all 3 versions must be considered simultaneously to fully understand what happened. We have seen in Kingdom Hearts Union Cross that a being of darkness can lurk within a person's heart and can project convincing illusions upon the space around them. With that in mind, I think it's simpler if Maleficent wasn't ever actually in her throne room at this moment at all. Either way, it ultimately does not matter too greatly if she was or was not. I believe that upon discovering Hoda, Baldr's darkness saw a perfect window of opportunity and used Baldr's body as a conduit to create an illusion of Maleficent's dragon form that distracted both Hoda and Baldr himself. Hoda thought she was battling and then protecting Baldr from a great dragon, but horribly, it was her own brother's darkness that was the true threat. It was not dragonfire, but the darkness itself that struck Hoda, bringing her to her knees in front of Baldr. At that moment, the poor boy had his greatest fears realized, and at the sight of his dying sister reaching out to him and beginning to fade before his eyes, he became fully vulnerable to his own darkness. He was now completely possessed by it, a helpless prisoner within his own body, capable only of observing what was to come. Heimdall, Sigrun, and Helgi arrived moments later. They do not see Baldr here. Perhaps Baldr's darkness's illusionary powers were disguising the young boy at this point. Again, it doesn't really matter, because they only witness Hoda kneeling on the ground and beginning to fade. Heimdall rushes towards Hoda, and if you combine the upperclassmen's version of these events with Baldr's, we can see that Hoda's final words were actually, "Baldr needs help." A desperate final cry for help to her friends that they would only manage to hear the latter portion of. I think the confusion caused by the illusions kept Hoda from fully knowing the truth about her brother, but some part of her heart must have known that Baldr was suffering immensely. What a tragedy that the realization came far too late. The upperclassmen could not see it, but the darkness struck the already fatally wounded Hoda. Heimdall watched Hoda's body fade away, as Helgi and Sigrun blocked an attack from, well, I suppose the darkness itself, disguised as Maleficent's dragon, or just a very convincing and tangible illusion, and began to battle it in order to avenge Hoda. The three students exhausted themselves battling against their foe, and while they took a moment to rest, Baldr's darkness struck the trio from behind, murdering them as well. It's again a little murky here, but I think that at this moment, Baldr's darkness transported Baldr back home to Skala ad Kaim, where the darkness relinquished control of its thrall and the boy fell unconscious. He was soon discovered in this passed out state, and Master Odin placed the traumatized Baldr in the infirmary, all alone. But back in the Enchanted Dominion, when their friends never returned, surely the remaining older students would have realized that something went horribly wrong. Vidar must have been feeling awful. Master Odin had stressed upon his students that upholding the order of each world was paramount, and Vidar, ever the dutiful student, had obeyed those lessons to the letter. His decision not to engage Maleficent immediately had led Hoda to act rashly and run off on her own, and then the next morning, Vidar actively advised against banding together as a group of 6 and rushing to Hoda's defense, again because he was more focused on keeping with Master Odin's teachings than on what was truly important, his friend's safety. The survivors could have searched that castle from top to bottom. They never would have found a trace of their 4 missing friends. The logical conclusion would probably be that their classmates fell in combat against some dark foe, and maybe Maleficent herself would have been the most obvious initial culprit. Regardless, Vidar certainly blames himself and his strict adherence to Odin's teachings for costing Hoda, Heimdall, Sigrun, and Helgi their lives. And no matter who or what being of darkness committed the deed, the survivors would learn the truth, and that evil would pay. Vidar must have solemnly vowed that their fallen classmates must be avenged. At this point, episode 1 of Dark Road chronologically begins. To quickly recap, not long after sending 7 of his burgeoning Keyblade wielders off on an unorthodox test, Master Odin has discovered an unconscious Baldr, has lost contact with his upperclassmen, and rationalizes that the best way of dealing with this situation is to send 6 more students, 6 even younger and even less experienced students, mind you, blindly out into the worlds to go and find them. Odin assembles his unaware lowerclassmen together and informs them that time is of the essence, that today will not be one of their usual classes. He tells the excited group that the upperclassmen went missing during their world-exploring training for the Mark of Mastery exam that was to be undertaken before the actual exam itself, which seems to differ from what Hoda told Baldr, but I digress. Master Odin entrusts the lower classmen with the task of also searching the worlds in order to find these missing people, much to the delight of the excited students who cannot wait to leave Scala and see what else is out there. Baldr will not be accompanying the rest of his classmates on this excursion. Master Odin lies to the class and says that he does not wish to trouble Baldr with the news that his sister is missing, and so he has given Baldr a different task for the time being. Odin stresses to his pupils the importance of maintaining each world's order, much as he did with the upperclassmen, that even if a world's order seems confusing, or if it conflicts with the students' own beliefs and sensibilities, it must be respected and upheld at all times. He also teaches the lower classmen the method to equip themselves with Keyblade armor, and how to transform their Keyblade into a vehicle that is capable of traveling through the lanes between to reach different worlds. Master Odin primes the worlds of Agrabah, Wonderland, the Dwarf Woodlands, and Beast Castle for his lower classmen to explore, and instructs them to split into 2 groups of 3. The students gather down by the water's edge, assemble a party, and then depart to fulfill their duty. In the first 3 episodes, Xehanort and Ericus will always travel together, accompanied by a third party member of the player's choosing, out of Ermod, Bragi, Erd, and Ver. The effect of this party member choice in these initial 3 episodes does not have any real consequence on the plot, so regardless of the footage you see on screen, you can assume any of those 4 students are equally as canon in that role. Xehanort, Ericus, and their companion first arrive in Agrabah, where they are immediately beset upon by Heartless. But the trio notice right away that something about their ambushes is strange. As a refresher, there are 2 categories of Heartless: the naturally occurring pureblood Heartless, and Emblem Heartless. Heartless named for the iconic emblem that appears on all of their designs. But you might recall that Emblem Heartless are initially created artificially in the lab between Radiant Garden's castle, and the machine that creates these creatures won't be invented for another 70 years or so, at a point in time between Kingdom Hearts Birth by Sleep and Kingdom Hearts 1. Emblem Heartless were seen regularly during the mobile games, which did take place in the ancient past, but those Emblem Heartless technically weren't real. They were merely projections conjured up by the Book of Prophecies for the Keyblade wielders to battle against. The students thought that the presence of these Heartless might be a clue to the older classmen's disappearance, but well, spoiler alert, Dark Road never actually explains it. From what we know about Missing Link so far, a game set even earlier in the timeline, Emblem Heartless will also be a primary antagonist of that game as well, so I expect to get actual answers to this mystery in that next title. After defeating their attackers, the trio heads into the town of Agrabah itself, finding it to be completely devoid of any human life. Dark Road solidifies an important plot point here. We know that the Keyblade War split the Realm of Light apart into an endless array of independent worlds, each engulfed in the boundless tide of the Realm of Darkness that flooded in to fill the void. I think that 0.2 Birth by Sleep provides a reasonable look at what each world would have been experiencing as a result of the catastrophe. But over a large amount of time, each world gradually began to naturally recover from the disaster. Each world would eventually restore their place in the Realm of Light, ridding themselves of the darkness and materializing gummy-based barriers to safeguard the scattered worlds from the surrounding darkness, preventing any contact or interference from any outside source affecting that world ever again. However, the recovery process was different for each world, and as of the beginning of Dark Road's story, some worlds had already fully recovered, others are still in the process of being recovered, and for some, the recovery process has barely begun. The 6 students had discussed this phenomenon before their departure, with the subtle relevant takeaway being that when visiting a mostly recovered world, it was important that the lower classmen obeyed the established order that that world adhered to. But if they found themselves in a brand new, barely established world, the eventual rules of that world could be influenced. To be there in a position of power at the beginning of a new world would allow one to establish order over that world from its inception. But regardless of a world's recovery status, time flows at relatively different speeds in each different world. And look, make no mistake, this is a very convenient writing contrivance that allows characters in this story, a story set the best part of a century before Birth by Sleep in Kingdom Hearts 1, to interact with characters and worlds that our future protagonists will encounter far, far later, but from their perspective, barely any time will have progressed at all. But this actually does make a good amount of sense within the series' already established lore. Being in the presence of darkness seems to distort the flow of time to those exposed, with the main example being that Aqua spent a decade in the Realm of Darkness without appearing to age a day. In Agrabah's case, as of the students' first visit, Though the world itself is back within the realm of light and in a recognizable state, the living beings of this world are one of the last elements to be recovered, and Heartless roam the streets in their place. After taking down a particularly strong Heartless, the group returns to Scarlet Adkayam and reunites with the other 3 lowerclassmen. The entire cohort shows concern for the upperclassmen's safety, given that powerful Heartless like the ones they encountered exist in these worlds. But they are determined to press on with their task, and elect not to report back to Master Odin yet, choosing to continue onwards to a new world, Wonderland. The 3 lowerclassmen that aren't in Xehanort's party defeat some of Wonderland's Heartless, which draws the ire of the Queen of Hearts and causes them to be arrested, then placed on trial, and unfortunately sentenced to death. Ericus is ready to rush in swinging, but Xehanort reminds him that they cannot commit such a flagrant disregarding of this world's order, but at a sign of escalation, they elect to charge in and defend their friends with words instead. Arguing with the Queen of Hearts reveals her perspective and the nature of this world's order. All ways here are her ways. She rules with an iron fist and keeps her subjects perpetually in fear and thus under her control. The wielders didn't intend any harm, but even an act as simple as attacking the Heartless without the Queen's express permission was interpreted as an affront to her, a challenge to her rule, and a crime worthy of capital punishment. Ericus tries to reason with the Queen but gets nowhere, only enraging her further for suggesting that her subjects' obedience comes not from love as she sees it, but instead from fear. And at the peak of her fury, Xehanort briefly glimpses the darkness within her heart, before it manifests as a giant Reaper Heartless. All 6 wielders see this Heartless as fair game, and draw their Keyblades to defeat this foe, which Xehanort and his party are able to do. The lowerclassmen regroup afterwards, and are a little rattled. The idealistic students have been forced to acknowledge that even though this world's order is maintained by a person with darkness in her heart who rules by fear, order is upheld all the same. Their perspective of what is right and what is wrong doesn't necessarily hold any water here, and furthermore, they had to personally confront the darkness in a person's heart for the first time. And if it could happen here, then perhaps a person with darkness in their heart could be responsible for the upperclassmen's disappearance as well. At this moment, both Xehanort and Ericus seem to experience a similar flashback to a moment that occurred during Union Cross, both quoting the Union leader Brain as he expressed that darkness can hide anywhere, even inside someone. Xehanort probably experienced this flashback third-hand through their guardian, the player of Union Cross, who had such a strong connection to the Union leaders, but as for Ericus? Well, who knows? The logical answer to me would be that seeing as this was such a pivotal moment for Brain, the words spoken at that time might feasibly have become a mantra that was passed on as a warning to his descendants. But again, I'm not here to speculate about things that we may learn in Kingdom Hearts Missing Link. Xehanort can't stop thinking about the darkness within the Queen's heart, but what is most troublesome is that she doesn't even seem to realize that it's there. She seems fully immersed in the delusion that her rule comes from love and not fear. She's clearly overcome by darkness, and if the wielders were to continue on this journey, they might meet more people like her. At some point, they may have no choice but to engage in combat with people with darkness in their hearts. But could they bring themselves to do it? To attack someone who didn't even realize what they had become? The group agrees that one party of 3 should move on and start searching a new world, while Xehanort's party will stay and continue searching for any signs of the upperclassmen here a little longer. Episode 3 begins with Xehanort and Ericus' party meeting some strange members of Wonderland as they continue their investigation. The Tweedles tell the group the story of The Walrus and the Carpenter, a cautionary tale in which the moral of the story is that curiosity can lead to danger, a lesson that both Ericus and Xehanort would do well to take heed of throughout their lives. In an interesting piece of foreshadowing, in Disney's cinematic adaptation of Alice in Wonderland specifically, 12 curious oysters are lured away from their home by a hungry walrus and eaten. Their encounter with the Mad Hatter and March Hare proves that people are able to live their lives in this world controlled by fear, and darkness won't necessarily manifest in the citizens as a result. Xehanort eventually determines that the upperclassmen probably haven't come to this world. The Queen's earlier reaction implied that no outsiders have been seen here in a long time. But nonetheless, observing and understanding the Queen's darkness could be helpful in tracking down the missing students, so the trio elected to return to her courtroom. They arrived to see one of her card soldiers being dragged away to a presumably grim fate, and Ericus began interrogating the Queen. He refused to believe that a heart could be based in anything but light. There must be an external dark force in play acting upon her. As the Queen began to lose her cool, Xehanort realized her darkness came from wrath, one of the negative emotions that Odin had warned the students about prior. Xehanort glimpsed the Queen's darkness once more, but this time, it seemed to smile, before bursting forth and manifesting itself as an even more powerful version of the Heartless that had been conjured before, a being fittingly named the Furious Reaper. It is worth noting that this Heartless, though at first glance is visually similar to the Fairy Reaper that the group battled earlier, now bears even more similarities to the Queen of Hearts herself. The exact same red and black colour scheme with white and yellow highlights should be immediately apparent. The being now sports a crown as the Queen does, the shaft of the Heartless's scythe now resembles the staff that the Queen carries, and the blade itself is now detailed with red and black triangles, reminiscent of the hearts and spades that can be found on the card soldiers that appear throughout the Kingdom Hearts series. The Fairy Reaper also attacked whatever surrounded it indiscriminately, including the Queen's own soldiers, and its appearance surprised the Queen. It did not seem like she intentionally summoned it, much less was able to control it. Whereas, the Furious Reaper appeared as the Queen demanded the Keyblade wielders lose their heads. Her card soldiers weren't in formation and ready to execute upon that command, but this Heartless instantly appeared and began exclusively attacking the wielders. It's almost as if the darkness within the Queen's heart has become far more closely entangled with her as a being since their last encounter, even if she has absolutely no idea that another being lurks within her heart. It was a tough battle, but the group vanquished the dark force within the Queen's heart, and agreed to head back to Scala to exchange what information they had gathered with the others. Continuing to follow sources of darkness seemed to be a logical next step in their search. The Furious Reaper was defeated, but there would surely be other dark entities out there. As we discussed earlier, Xehanort was discovering that as they, Keyblade wielders of light, move throughout the worlds, they may be unintentionally casting shadows in their wake, and exactly the same thing may have happened with the upperclassmen. Ver questioned whether the wielders literally were the reason the darkness was being born, but Ert wasn't so quick to believe in Xehanort's theory just yet. Light exists. Darkness exists. The wielders were granted Keyblades to spread light and counteract the darkness. She can accept all of that, but it's a bit too much of a leap for her to believe that light could literally lead to darkness. So how would they even begin to track the darkness? The Queen may have unknowingly had shadows cast on her heart by an outside source, or she may have welcomed it willingly. But Xehanort starts to wonder if any of that even matters. He's just witnessed a world in which darkness, for as bad as it has always been portrayed to be, kept order in a world. Wonderland's people lived in darkness-based fear, yes, but it was by living under that rule that ensured stability for Wonderland. It's as if the concept of whether light and darkness are viewed as good and bad is only a matter of perspective. But Ericus is having none of this. He refuses to entertain any notion that darkness is anything but bad. Always has been, always will be, and he hopes that Xehanort isn't forgetting his role as a guardian of light. And Xehanort isn't forgetting, but he wants the group to consider the possibility that if the upperclassmen entered a world that was ruled by darkness and tried to impose their light-based beliefs upon it, then they would be the ones disrupting that world's order, and it could have led to their demise. Ericus won't even consider this outcome, but Hermod rallies the group. They'll continue searching for the upperclassmen in a new world, and if that goal coincides with delving further into the mysteries of darkness, then that's what they'll do. With the plan locked in, Xehanort, Ericus, and Ver departed for the Dwarf Woodlands. While here, Ver had gotten absentmindedly separated from Xehanort and Ericus, which led her to stumble upon the Evil Queen's castle and the magic mirror that could be found within. And after witnessing the mirror's incredible ability to truthfully answer any question, the magical objects seemed to be just what was needed to locate the upperclassmen. The trio was able to rescue one group of 7 people that needed help, it just wasn't the particular group that they were looking for, and then they set off for the Queen's chambers. Ericus wastes no time in asking the truly important questions, but before they can ask something actually useful, the Evil Queen interrupts. The envious Queen forces the mirror to attack the outsiders, and they are drawn into the mirror's realm. Ericus notes that it reeks of darkness, upholding a much discussed piece of continuity from Chain of Memories, and eventually the trio are able to defeat it, freeing themselves from their trap. Now that they have the mirror to themselves, the wielders begin to first ask where Vidar is, but they needn't have bothered, because at that precise moment, Vidar himself appeared through a portal behind them. When we last left Vidar, I rationalized that himself, Vala, and Vali must have been on the path of vengeance, to identify and strike back at whatever dark force took Hoda, Heimdall, Sigrun, and Helgi from them. The first step of this plan seems to have been replenishing their ranks, and replacing the 4 lights that were lost with new ones willing to step up and take their place. Vidar tells the lower-classmen none of this, of course, and ignores Ericus' questions about why he's yet to return home. His focus is drawn to Xehanort. Seeing Xehanort in person, there is clearly something different about him, and he can now understand why Xehanort has caught the attention of Master Odin, implying the pair have spoken about Xehanort before. But his true target is Ver, honing in on her current lingering doubts. Earlier, when Ver had first discovered the magic mirror, she had asked it if she would ever become a Keyblade Master, to which the mirror bluntly replied, well, in rhyme of course, that within the comfortable familiarity and shelter of her friends, her progress would stagnate. She's faced with a difficult choice. If she never leaves this blanketed safety net of her friends, then when the group eventually grows up and goes their separate ways, perhaps she won't have the ability to make it on her own. But Vidar is offering Ver a chance to break out of her comfortable bubble and to follow him down an unknown path towards achieving his goals. Ericus tries to convince Ver to stay, but Xehanort seems to agree with the sentiment and to embrace the inevitability of change. Ver thanks the two for their perspective, but her heart and her mind are made up, and with a determined look on her face, she and Vidar enter the portal, leaving Xehanort and a bewildered Ericus behind. They resolve to return to Scala immediately and let everyone know what just happened. It's logical to assume at this point that Vidar explained the upperclassmen's great tragedy and necessity for revenge to Ver, and she in turn would have likely filled them in on the task that Odin laid out for her and her cohorts. That Xehanort, Ericus, Omod, Erd, Bragi, and herself were supposed to find the missing upperclassmen, and that Odin had given Baldr a different task to complete in the meantime. But I surmise that this piece of information was enough for Vidar to finally solve the mystery he had been struggling with. Odin was not preventing Baldr from attending this excursion because of some concern for his well-being. Baldr was the very culprit that they were searching for. Somehow, he had committed an awful taboo and killed his sister and her friends. But how? Was he possessed by some being of darkness? Were the Heartless responsible, or did the darkness manifest from within his own heart? Too much was still unknown. But regardless of the reasoning, the plan to seek revenge was brought to a screeching halt. How could they hunt down and slay Hoda's younger brother, even considering what he had done? In what sick world would that be honouring Hoda's memory? The emotional turmoil that Vidar had experienced in the last few days was becoming too much to handle. The fear, the guilt, the horror, the shame. Where would he even go from here? How could he continue as a Keyblade wielder after suffering such tragic losses to the darkness? Vidar also returned to Scala Achaeum, where he would announce to Master Odin that he was leaving. But he barely started his declaration when Odin cut him off, with a warning that a darkness like no other may soon be upon the worlds. Despite never teaching the students of this fairly important topic before, for some reason, Odin decides that right now is the perfect time to introduce Vidar to the concept of the 13 ancient darknesses, the most primitive of shadows, and the source of practically all forms of darkness in this world. As a quick refresher, the 13 ancient darknesses were revealed near the ending of Union Cross to be the ultimate enemies of the Master of Masters and people of light at large. They were beings that initially had physical forms in the most ancient past of the series, just like humans and other beings of light, but abandoned those forms to become unkillable and gain an enormous advantage in the conflict between darkness and light. Without form, they were able to possess endless human beings, infiltrating their hearts and using their undignified victims as helpless vessels to commit their schemes, costing many people of light their lives, including many allies of the Master of Masters himself. The entire point of the Keyblade War scene in Kingdom Hearts Union Cross was that it was an essential component of the Master of Masters' plan to put a stop to these darknesses. Prior to the war, the Master had trained and tormented his unknowing disciples in such a way that their hearts had become the perfect traps for the 7 most deadly of these darknesses. It's as if the Master of Masters saw his pupils as nothing but appropriately named containers to house the darknesses analogous to the 7 deadly sins. Master Odin refers to these beings as true darknesses, and though he doesn't seem to know everything about this ancient foe, he is somehow aware of the Master's incredibly secret plan to deal with them. He knows that the Master of Masters himself, plus the foretellers and Lushu, was said to have trapped 7 of the 13 within their hearts. And even more confusingly, Odin also accurately knows that another 4 of the 13 darknesses were trapped in the realm between of another world, something that basically only Ephemer and Skull should be able to know about. He's not quite correct about the last 2 though. Apparently the theory is that they might have been destroyed when the day to Daybreak Town collapsed, when the truth is that one of them hitched a ride in Ven's heart as Ven travelled through time into the future. We don't have any solid idea about the last one yet though. The last time we saw it, it was conversing with Lushu in the real world. But this implies that somehow, despite both versions of Daybreak Town falling apart, this extremely sensitive information has been passed down through the generations. Maybe it was written in the Book of Prophecies, maybe Ephem or Lushu were able to spread the knowledge down, who knows? This is another question for Missing Link to answer. Vidar is listening closely, and picks up that Odin is implying that one or more of the unaccounted true darknesses has returned to this world, despite being unseen for hundreds, if not thousands of years. Vidar is, of course, at this very moment, wondering what could have caused Baldr to attack his sister. And without Vidar even having to ask, well, along comes Master Odin with an extremely plausible and tempting answer. Perhaps one of these ancient darknesses has returned and possessed Baldr. That would mean that the atrocities weren't Baldr's fault. Vidar asks how one would defeat one of these true darknesses, and again, Odin correctly knows that the reason the Lost Masters trapped the darknesses within their hearts was because this made the darknesses vulnerable again. If a formless darkness was trapped within someone's heart, and then that person was killed, the darkness would be destroyed in the process. But Vidar cannot bring himself to make that awful choice. If a true darkness has infiltrated Baldr's heart, there must be some way to rid him of the darkness without murdering him too. And luckily again, Master Odin has a possible solution. The Great Kingdom Hearts is said to have the power to purge the worlds, and if one were to obtain and use this power, maybe the true darkness would be eradicated in the process. Odin reminds Vidar that to summon Kingdom Hearts is strictly forbidden, but then immediately afterwards lists the exact steps he believes will summon it. He tells Vidar that the known method is to gather 7 true lights that shine against the darkness of chaos, after which Kingdom Hearts should reveal itself. Odin cautions that successfully summoning Kingdom Hearts and purging everything would have a profound effect on every world. And then, without Vidar even having to mention Baldr, Odin asks whether preserving one life is worth the cost. Odin cautions Vidar one more time that summoning Kingdom Hearts is forbidden, but he may as well have saved his breath. Vidar now knows what he and the upperclassmen must do. They must gather 7 true lights. While I understand that Master Odin has recently discovered Baldr unconscious and can probably sense that something about the situation is wrong, the timing of his latest lesson is extremely suspicious. Of course, at this point in the narrative, the audience has no idea what Vidar has been up to, and one part of the reason for this cutscene's inclusion is to plant the idea in the viewer's mind that one of the 13 darknesses from Union Cross could have returned. But regardless, Vidar would have never even known about the existence of the true darknesses, and certainly have never even considered summoning Kingdom Hearts as a solution to the supposed problem if Master Odin had not literally planted these ideas in his head at Vidar's most vulnerable moment. And sure, he cautions Vidar that summoning Kingdom Hearts is forbidden, but it's almost like warning Vidar not to take his beautiful Ferrari out for a spin after literally handing him the keys and telling him how much fun he would have behind the wheel. If Master Odin is actually acting with 100% sincerity and zero ulterior motives here, I will be completely floored, because at best this is gross incompetence that could potentially have apocalyptic consequences, and again, I will be looking for explanations in Kingdom Hearts Missing Link. At the same time that Odin was conversing with Vidar, Xehanort and Ericus had returned to Bragi, Erd, and Ermod to let them know what happened. They wanted to tell Odin as well, but he was conveniently busy with Vidar at this moment, so the young people had to come to a decision about what to do next on their own. Ericus is racked with guilt that he didn't try harder to stop Ver from leaving with Vidar, and wants to head back and ask the mirror where she is right away. Xehanort, however, trusts that Vidar and Ver will turn up again when they complete whatever goal Vidar wants to achieve, and thinks that if the lower classmen continue working towards their own goals, then they'll very likely cross paths once more. Ericus really lays on the manipulation here, accusing Xehanort of not caring about his friends, and puffing himself up as wanting to go about life as a Keyblade Master would, to which Xehanort retorts that a Keyblade Master is just a title, and not what's actually important about the role. The group splits on uneasy but understanding terms, as Ericus takes Bragi with him back to the Magic Mirror, whereas Xehanort, Erd, and Ermod press on to a new world. Beast's Castle. Upon arrival, Xehanort's party immediately defends one of this world's residents from some Heartless, and they soon learn that a mystical item has gone missing that seems to have some connection to this world's order. After talking to the Beast himself, they get a clue that the upperclassmen might actually be responsible for the theft, and before too long, their suspicions are confirmed. Erd gets separated from Omod and Xehanort when dealing with a powerful breed of Heartless, and finds herself in a particularly bad spot, but holds her composure and remains strong against overwhelming odds. Suddenly, Vala of the upperclassmen appears, and dispels the Heartless effortlessly. Vala has been observing from afar, and is impressed by Erd's conviction, and believes her to be a light that shines even brighter within the darkness of chaos. Vala seems to think that Erd is a suitable candidate for helping the upperclassmen achieve their goal, and Erd has a lot of questions about just what that goal might be. But Vala seems a little taken aback, expecting a lot more obedience out of her younger colleague, and seems quite disappointed when Erd reiterates her plan to keep adhering to her mission, not abandoning it to follow at the whims of the mysterious Vala. Vala bids Erd adieu, and asks if Erd could kindly return the Beast's rose to him before she goes, which the confused lower-classmen begrudgingly do, before departing again for the next world. Next, the trio arrives back in Agrabah, finding it to be significantly more restored than it was when they had initially visited. For one, people have returned as if they had never been taken in the first place, and everyone's favourite royal vizier, Jafar, conjures up a sob story and begs Erd, Xehanort and Omod for their help to seek out a magic lamp. Omod seems genuinely moved by his plight, but Erd and especially Xehanort are less convinced, the latter sensing darkness in the form of greed within Jafar, but agree to go along with the sham because it'll give them access to an important part of the world that they haven't been able to search yet. The three wielders are recognised as true diamonds in the rough, as all our Kingdom Hearts protagonists seem to be, and descend into the Cave of Wonders. They eventually catch up to Ericus and Bragi, who had also ventured onto Agrabah after not having any success with the magic mirror in the Dwarf Woodlands, and are also on a lamp-seeking mission. When they discuss Jafar's deception, Bragi wants to call the entire search off, but Erd feels they should press on, and explains that this lamp might be similar to the Rose of Beast Castle, an object of great importance that is essential to this world's order. The united party reach the depths of the cavern and finally discover the lamp, just as Vidar simultaneously arrives via portal. Erd's suspicions seem to have been proven correct. Vidar and the upperclassmen are indeed looking for powerful artifacts that help maintain each world's order, and Ericus can't believe that Ver is content with helping him risk the balance of the worlds to achieve this goal. Vidar explains that yes, they are disrupting the balance of the worlds by taking these items, but they hope that in response they will find true lights that shine even in the face of confusion and uncertainty. And there actually seems to be a certain amount of logic to that plan. This is getting into theory and future video territory, so I'll keep it brief. But maintaining balance and order in each world has always been stressed as being of paramount importance, even as far back as Kingdom Hearts 1. Residents from one world should be prevented at all costs from learning about the existence of other worlds outside of their own, no matter what external forces attempt to act upon them. And I can extrapolate from what is being said in Dark Road, that an unintentional consequence of the Keyblade wielders maintaining each world's order is ensuring that the story of these worlds play out exactly as they did in the original Disney films that inspired them. Consider that in the existing Disney films that many non-original Kingdom Hearts worlds are based upon, a villain never has the powers of darkness, or heartless, nobodies, or unversed to aid them. But in the Kingdom Hearts iterations of these stories, the villains often find themselves granted the incredible, otherworldly abilities to summon and wield dark forces that they never had in the original. Should these powers be used unchecked, surely the villain would upset the intended events of the story and end up seizing victory over the protagonists that were supposed to prevail. But from what we have seen, every time, without fail, along came heroic Keyblade wielders just in time that act as a force for maintaining order, almost as if they are summoned in response to the additional threat of these intrusive foreign forces. The darkness can be as enormous or powerful as it likes, but it seems that when a Keyblade wielder is fighting to maintain the order of a world, they will always be granted enough power to succeed and ensure that events end up playing out as they are supposed to. It doesn't matter if a world is said to be real, or a memory recreation, or a data recreation from a journal, or a version based on dreams, or an illusionary version of it conjured up by yet another journal, or yet another data version based on the second journal version. The Kingdom Hearts version of a story must always remain faithful to the original film. A hero or heroes will always rise to save the day. A world's order must not be allowed to slip away into the chaos of the unknown. So both the magic lamp and the rose from Beast Castle are two items of extreme narrative importance and consequence to their original films. I don't think it is too much of a stretch to say that each entire story hangs around them respectfully, and removing them from their proper place in the narrative would have disastrous consequences on the original plot. This is exactly what the upperclassmen are hoping to threaten with their actions, with the desired outcome being that a great power will appear to them that balances what has been imbalanced and restores the intended order. They, Keyblade wielders and Guardians of Light, have chosen to act in the role typically occupied by the forces of darkness in order to force great lights to rise up, almost as if by harmonic resonance. They must find their 7 true lights that shine brightly in the face of chaos, no matter the cost. The lower classmen are horrified that the upperclassmen could even consider disrupting the order in such a way, and Vidar scoffs as he recalls Master Odin's lessons that stressed the importance of that very subject. It was, after all, Vidar's adherence to those rules that helped cost his friends their lives. But Vidar is steadfast in his belief that true darkness must be defeated, insisting that he and Ericus both want the same thing. And as if to test Ericus, or maybe to put the burden of such an act upon Ericus himself, Vidar asks that Ericus also take up the goal of finding these brilliant lights, and states that he should be the one to take the lamp, before promptly departing with Ver. Ericus gathers his courage and reaches for the lamp, but quickly realizes that the cost is just too great, and the poor boy might be in over his head. Xehanort comforts his friend and affirms that they are far too young and inexperienced to know how to act in this situation. And in an interesting piece of foreshadowing, insinuates that when Ericus is an older Keyblade master, he might know what decision must be made when faced with a similar terrible choice, with world-altering consequences. The group decide to return to Master Odin to confer, not caring at all about returning to Jafar and his false sympathy act. Looks like he'll need to find another diamond in the rough to aid him in his schemes. The lower classmen relay what they have learned about Vidar and his goals to their master. That Vidar believes true darkness, whatever that is, has taken the lives of some of Vidar's friends, and that Vidar wishes to assemble 7 true lights to combat this great threat. The master informs the younger students too about the nature of the 13 formless beings known as the true darknesses, and when the students ask, just as Vidar had, how one would possibly defeat something like that, Master Odin again wastes no time in also revealing his theory that the great power of Kingdom Hearts should be capable of purging everything. He at least states that as of right now, it cannot be certain whether or not the threat that Vidar faces is true darkness, and even if it is summoning Kingdom Hearts the correct decision? Will they risk the lives of people and worlds everywhere to possibly save Vidar and Ver from the target that has already taken several of their friends' lives? Odin affirms that the students were correct. They are not equipped to deal with this vitally important matter, and that they have all been dismissed from their task of solving the disappearance of the missing wielders. He discharges his students, who all get up and leave the room, heads bowed in thought, disappointment, and shame. But as Xehanort leaves, he is focused on only one thing. As soon as Master Odin mentioned the power of Kingdom Hearts, a thought entered Xehanort's mind for the first time. The power of Kingdom Hearts could purge everything, even the worlds themselves, leaving a blank canvas upon which to start again. Once his students have all left, Odin whispers to himself, "The Dark Seeker will finally be upon us." I had my suspicions up to this point, but upon hearing these lines, I was fully convinced. The false mark of mastery exam, the insistence on maintaining order to the detriment of all else, the spoon-feeding of information about the true darknesses, and the method of summoning Kingdom Hearts to absolutely anyone who asks, I fail to see how Master Odin is not acting with ulterior motives throughout Kingdom Hearts Dark Road. At this stage we can only speculate his overall goals, except of course to affirm that one component of the plan seems to have literally been to bring the Dark Seeker into the world, or at the very least, be there to observe the Dark Seeker's arrival. For those needing a refresher, and to fast forward several decades, one incarnation of Xehanort's future self is Ansem, the self-proclaimed Seeker of Darkness, one component of a man that will eventually become ruthlessly obsessed with bringing about another Keyblade War as a means of summoning Kingdom Hearts. Master Odin seems confident that he has just witnessed the advent of such a man upon this world, which implies to me that the existence of someone known as the Darkseeker was seemingly predicted to occur. Again, all eyes should be on Missing Link for any signs of what Master Odin and any collaborators he might have are up to. I'm not even necessarily saying that his actions are inherently evil, but the man is absolutely up to something more than just being a teacher. The disappointed students made their way back down to the benches by Skala's water's edge, wondering what to do next. Odin had forbid them from pursuing this matter any further, and even if they wanted to, he had already closed all the gates. They weren't able to explore any previously visited worlds. Ericus and Omod were particularly frustrated in their inability to do anything, but they all wished to continue with their task, despite Odin dismissing them. Erd wondered if they could learn more about the true darknesses. Maybe that could help. Bragi responded without much hope. The only other people they could ask about true darkness are Vidar or the ones that have already died, and there's not much chance of that happening. Baldr seemed to agree. At that moment, the absent boy appeared, and his excited friends rushed to greet him. Xehanort asks what Baldr has been up to, and Baldr repeats the line that Master Odin used at the beginning of the student's quest, that he had been busy with his task to learn more about darkness and its different types. In reality, he had been doing something far different. You'll hopefully recall that the last time I mentioned Baldr, my thought was that immediately after his body was temporarily overcome by his own darkness and used to kill his sister and 3 other upperclassmen, his darkness took him through a corridor back to Skala, where it relinquished control and Baldr fell unconscious. Upon being discovered, Master Odin placed the fragile boy in the infirmary alone. Instead of being surrounded by his friends in a time of weakness, Baldr was kept alone in a dark, windowless room with nothing but time and his own thoughts to keep him company. Baldr's sister Hoda was his source of light, a bright beacon to repel his own darkness. But in that moment of weakness, the darkness had taken control and snuffed that light out, leaving only the dark void with nothing to repel it. Over 7 agonizing days, while the lower classmen were taking their first steps in the world outside, Baldr was kept in this awful room, left to dwell on the things that had happened in the Enchanted Dominion as his shadow grew and grew in strength. His sister was gone. Her friends had failed to protect her, and now they were gone too. By the 4th day, he realized that everyone had perished, and by the 5th and 6th day, Baldr realized that he was responsible. By the 7th, Baldr, now completely flanked by his own dark shadow, came to the awful conclusion that without his sister in the world may as well fall to darkness. And the shadow welcomed the Forsaken boy with open arms, whispering into Baldr's heart that if Baldr no longer had hope for this world, he should purge it, plunge the 13 lights into shadow. Baldr stood, now perfectly in sync with his heart's own darkness, as it became irrevocably entwined with his heart and body. From this moment on, whenever I mention Baldr, I am most likely referring to the pair that are now in complete control of Baldr's body. Baldr and his darkness working in tandem. The darkness would act through Baldr to carry out its plan, and together, they would make the lights disappear. Once free of the infirmary, it was able to move unrestrained throughout the worlds, and had recently been keeping watch over the actions of the upper and lower classmen. As mentioned earlier, Baldr's darkness, as a component of Baldr's own heart, wants above all else to usurp the current status quo of these light-based worlds that condemn it for merely existing, and forge a world where it can not just exist, but thrive. And whether Vidar was maliciously guided down this path by Master Odin or not, his mission to endanger the worlds and secure 7 brilliant lights probably would have succeeded in summoning Kingdom Hearts. However, this would have had disastrous consequences. Summoning and invoking the power of Kingdom Hearts would not have merely purged the darkness within Baldr's heart, as Odin had softly insinuated. Its uncontrolled might would have annihilated everything, shattering what little remained of the scattered worlds and leaving nothing but rubble from which those worlds could begin anew. Exactly the outcome that Baldr's darkness desired, and its actions from the shadows had all been in service of achieving that goal. And when Vidar showed signs that his resolve to assemble those 7 lights and summon Kingdom Hearts was wavering, the darkness decided that the time had come for a more personal touch. Vidar may have been unwilling to do what was required to see his goals through, but the darkness was not. Of course, the lower-classmen knew absolutely none of this. They had no reason to doubt the lie that Master Odin had told them. Vidar, of course, didn't know either. He was still running under the assumption that Master Odin had carefully led him towards. That the most likely theory was that one of the ancient 13 darknesses had possessed Baldr, and that summoning Kingdom Hearts to purge the worlds was the only probable way to destroy it without killing Baldr in the process. Baldr played the lower-classmen along with an innocent and ignorant routine, asking what they'd been up to, tricking them into sharing the assignment that they were supposed to have kept secret from him, before letting slip that Bragi's question might actually have a way of being answered. Apparently Baldr knew of a world where communication with the dead was actually possible. He then reveals his version of the sequence of events that had led to the death of his sister. That he had arrived just in time to see Hoda getting attacked by a great dragon, that Hoda had given her life defending him, and that after that he passed out, and when he awoke next, he was in the infirmary. Erd asks if he is okay, and he almost cheerfully replies that he's fine. He just wants to know what led to all of this. Without a chance for anyone to ask any more questions, Baldr immediately summons his Keyblade and opens a corridor to the underworld. If anyone asked, Baldr could just respond that this was one of the worlds that Master Odin had given him permission to explore, and that he still had access to, but in reality, I don't even know if Master Odin knew that Baldr had left the infirmary yet. Without hesitation, Ericus and Xehanort agree to enter the portal. Erd follows, and Omod is the only one that expresses any caution. He has to be led in by the shoulders by Bragi. Upon arriving in this new world, and expressing out loud a desire to reach the underworld, Hades, Lord of the Dead, immediately appears and confronts the outsiders, offering them a one-way ticket into the place that most people are usually dying to get out of. After some typical game shenanigans and Hades' trickery, all 6 lower-classmen are warped into the underworld. Xehanort, Ericus, and Bragi appear in Hades' own chambers, with no sign of Baldr, Omod, or Erd. The trio interrogates Hades about their missing friends, but he's not being super helpful. He's more curious as to why they're trying so hard to get into this place. Xehanort confesses that they want to speak to some people who have died, and Hades agrees to assist them on one condition. If he's successful, one of the 3 must stay behind permanently in the underworld, to be his pawn in Hades' next scheme. The classmen are repulsed by the suggestion, but Xehanort still asks Hades if he can locate Hoda for them, and after some time, Hades returns and confirms that he has located her and her friends. He sends the trio on their way, and greedily wonders to himself just how many pawns are about to join his collection. On the way to their destination, Cerberus attacks the trio. They keep the beast busy, but aren't able to take him down, and seem to be getting backed into a corner, when suddenly, some blasts of energy fire in from the east. Baldr leaps in to lend a hand, and generously tells Xehanort and Ericus that they should continue onwards to the deceased upperclassmen, leaving Cerberus for Bragi and himself to handle. Ericus isn't so sure, but Bragi is more than confident in his own abilities, and the former reluctantly agrees to press onwards. Xehanort warns Bragi to be careful, but tells Baldr that he'll see him later. He can count on it. And initially you could read this as a positive thing, that Xehanort knows Baldr will be fine, and that the pair will definitely reunite soon, both safe and sound. But under the surface, it is clear that Xehanort meant it as a subtle warning. Baldr's timely arrival and offer to help by splitting the group are enough for Xehanort to begin piecing together the puzzle. But with no proof, and under the dangerous circumstances, Xehanort can hardly raise those concerns now. But even though his suspicions are raised, perhaps Xehanort does not want to confront the reality of what it would mean if those suspicions were correct. What he might be forced to do, should Baldr not be truly as he presents himself to be, and Xehanort can only offer a veiled warning to the two that he is forced to leave behind. The pair soon find Erd and Omod, who have only just regained consciousness after being transported by Hades, quickly explaining to them that they left Baldr and Bragi fighting Cerberus alone. The newfound wielders offer to run back and help, and Ericus wants to return with them, but Erd urges them to keep going, and Xehanort agrees, explicitly asking them to make sure that Bragi is okay, before he and Ericus continue onwards with their task. But Erd and Omod needn't have bothered running back, as Bragi and Baldr have already convinced the beast to turn tail and run. Baldr cautions Bragi that the darkness here is especially dense. Their usual methods at fighting it won't work. This is enough for the penny to drop for Bragi, who has likely also been trying to figure out just what has been going on. He realizes in that moment that Baldr is responsible for most, if not all, of the chaos that has befallen the upper and lower classmen up to this point. And Baldr knows the jig is up, that the time has come to snuff Bragi out as well and blame his death on Cerberus. But Bragi is confusingly not afraid, or even that bothered at all, to be honest. It is at this point that I'm going to give a warning to the people that have not yet played and seen the ending of Kingdom Hearts 3, that it would be in their best interest to skip the video forward to the timestamp they see on the screen at this time. Bragi dispels his Keyblade and begins to lay some cards of his own on the table, because this is the end for both of them, not just Bragi. If Baldr dispatches Bragi here and goes back alone, Xehanot's suspicions of Baldr are 100% confirmed. But Baldr isn't worried. He doesn't need to go back right away, he just needs Bragi dead. But now here Bragi is unleashing some vague threats that completely baffle Baldr, saying that he'd draw far too much attention as a vessel, and that Bragi would rather keep his current body a little longer. Whatever that means. Baldr strains to even hold his weapon against the unarmed Bragi, until Bragi effortlessly resummons his own Keyblade and disarms his former classmate with lightning fast speed. Bragi mocks the far less experienced Baldr, and even though it seems like he could easily put a stop to Baldr's entire plan here and now, Bragi states that he doesn't want to fight. He'll go along with Baldr's plan and simply disappear. Baldr is utterly perplexed and asks just who Bragi really is, a question to which he receives no answer, and the frustrated boy resummons his blade and charges towards Bragi, ready to strike him in the back. He might have even got a couple of good hits in, we don't know, but ultimately, Baldr was not able to take his opponent down. We'll come back to Bragi later. Because meanwhile, Xehanort and Ericus have still been pressing onwards, and Xehanort finally alludes to the fact that something about the situation has been bothering him. He doesn't reveal to Ericus his suspicions of Baldr just yet, and before much longer, the duo have reached their destination. As light cascades down from above, the recently deceased Hoda, Heimdall, Helgi, and Sigrun appear before Xehanort and Ericus. They are surprised to hear that Vidar is planning on summoning Kingdom Hearts to purge the worlds, and Hoda actually closes her eyes and clutches her heart when Ericus reveals that Vidar's reasoning is that he wants to destroy the darkness that took the quartet away from them. Heimdall tells their recollection of the story, that the trio went chasing after the absent Hoda, only to find her already fading away by the time they reached her. They attempted to battle the evil fairy, but no mention was made of Baldr at all. At some point they must have been struck down, and when they awoke, all that was left of them was their hearts, cast adrift in a world with a never-ending sky and ocean. Spoiler warning for Kingdom Hearts 3 yet again, but anyone that has played that game should recognize a description of the final world anywhere. And it's interesting to think that even though these people did not die in Olympus or the underworld, their hearts have been temporarily summoned from the final world to this place, and Xehanort and Ericus can even see them in their original forms. Perhaps there are other hearts in the final world that this same ability could be used on. Ericus wonders if Maleficent is the true threat they seek, though she doesn't sound anything like the formless darkness that Vidar was concerned about, and Heimdall and Helgi reject the notion as well. The upperclassmen's time in the final world seems to have granted them some new level of perspective, that maybe the difference between light and darkness is not as straightforward as they had been led to believe. That instead of feeding into the conflict born of light and dark, perhaps there was a way to understand other people, and not immediately write off others with opposing beliefs as being followers of darkness. Xehanort and Ericus don't seem to share the viewpoint, but the upperclassmen are not here to judge. Their final message is that Xehanort and Ericus' lives are not the upperclassmen's to judge, but theirs to lead. They should broaden their horizons and find their own answers. And with that, their time is up. The four begin to fade away back into the light. But before she goes, Hoda approaches Xehanort and asks him for a favor. Hoda has remained quiet all this time, perhaps out of a guilty conscience, or so as not to reveal what she knows about her brother's involvement in what has happened. But now she asks Xehanort for a chance to temporarily rest within his heart and go with him, to see her brother and speak to him one more time. Now that they have conversed with their allies that have passed on, Xehanort and Ericus race back to their friends. Ermod took off to search for Baldr and Bragi, so the pair is only able to find Erd. Ericus calls out to the keeper of this domain for assistance in finding the rest, and Hades materializes immediately upon hearing his name being called. Erd asks the Lord of the Dead if he knows where either Bragi or Baldr are, And Hades is almost insulted by the insinuation that he would bother to keep tabs on or even learn the names of these two insignificant young Keyblade wielders. But he at least knows that one of the pair is here, as a new permanent resident of the underworld. Hades' words are written to deliberately obscure the fate of Baldr and Bragi, as at this stage the audience has not yet learned about Baldr's fall to darkness, nor Bragi's secret agenda. But in hindsight, we know that neither Baldr nor Bragi are actually dead, so I can only infer that Bragi has already left this world, and that Hades considers the unassuming Baldr to be as good as his already. The group is outraged. Erd in particular is absolutely not about to leave without her friends, which is especially understandable given that she wasn't even present when Xehanort made the deal in the first place. But Hades protests that they knew the terms of the agreement, and if they won't honour it, then he can always make room for everyone here. They begin to battle, but before too long Omod returns from his unsuccessful search and blocks one of Ericus' strikes. He is completely appalled by his friend's actions. How is attacking a resident of this world maintaining the order? Ericus protests, convincing Omod that Hades is the reason why he could not find Bragi or Baldr, and that's enough for Omod to switch sides. Hades is more than a little agitated at this point. Regardless of the accusations, he hasn't personally taken anybody as a pawn, yet. And now that he's facing off against 4 of these self-righteous little twerps, it might be time to get serious. He raises his hand to cast some sort of attack, but he and the 4 wielders are quickly taken by surprise. A giant portal of darkness has somehow appeared behind his foes, a portal which has enough of a gravitational force to draw the 4 young wielders inside before dispersing. Hades is very confused and returns to his calmer state. All that bluster, and those 4 weirdos just vanished like that? But as he begins to turn and walk away, he catches sight of the person who summoned the mysterious portal. That white-haired Keyblade wielder from earlier. Baldr was acting from the shadows, and while the wielders were worn down and distracted by Hades, he seized this golden opportunity to claim some more victims. The way that the portal was opened by a Keyblade wielder of darkness and then drew in 4 lights is ironically a total inverse of the conclusion of Union Cross, where a Keyblade wielder of light pulled the same maneuver to trap 4 darknesses within a corridor of light. You know, it's sort of like poetry, they rhyme. Either way, the 4 Keyblade wielders have vanished, Bragi is long gone, and Baldr is certainly not about to hang around and become Hades' pawn, so it looks like someone else will have to fulfill that role in Hades' next scheme. Xehanort awakens in the chaos of a corridor of darkness, and spots Ericus unconscious nearby. He rushes to his friend and manages to shake Ericus awake, urging him to immediately equip his Keyblade armor. Xehanort cautions that if either of them listen to the faint whispers of this place, the darkness will worm its way into their minds, and then their hearts. Their Keyblade armor will buy them some time, but its protection won't last forever. They need to find a way out. But how? Things look bad, and the pair decide their first move should be to locate Omod and Erd. That pair have also banded together and equipped their own armor, but unfortunately, Omod has begun to hear the murmurs, and believes that darkness has breached his heart. He collapses in pain as Erd urges him not to give up hope, despite the darkness corroding away their armored masks as they speak. But there, slightly out of sight, perhaps a faint glimmer of hope. Erd seems to recognize someone and smiles, but within moments assumes a cautious stance. Baldr has followed his prey into the corridor of darkness, and there is nothing the helpless pair can do to avoid being his 5th and 6th victims. With one final strike from Baldr, Erd and Omod's last moments are spent incapacitated as the darkness eats away at their Keyblade armor before finally consuming their bodies, leaving their hearts to drift away. Nearby, but tragically too far away to help, Xehanort and Ericus continue to trudge through the fog of darkness, but the dark clouds are becoming too much to bear, and Ericus falls to his knees before completely keeling over. A careful eye will notice that the tufts of darkness appear to be in the shape of Baldr's silhouette, and as Xehanort hobbles back to his friend's side, he too finally concedes to the darkness and falls unconscious as well. Baldr walks towards his prey, but is forced to flee at the sight of a brilliant sphere of light approaching from the distance. Master Odin has finally arrived, and his light engulfs the 2 collapsed students. No more darkness corrodes their armor, now that his light is shielding them. Odin sadly remarks that only these 2 remain, and Baldr can only watch from the shadows as Odin opens a corridor of light with the Master Defender Keyblade, revealing that he is the iconic weapon's current wielder, saving the two boys' lives as they escape this nightmare and flee to Scala ad Caem. What can even be said after all the horrible things that have happened? Without speaking a word and without even really looking at each other, Xehanort and Ericus assemble their board for a round of chess. Maybe it brings them some comfort to engage each other in a familiar game with rules, order, and a predictable outcome. Master Odin arrives to greet his two remaining pupils and relieve them of any responsibility for the immeasurable losses that have been suffered. He blames the upperclassmen's departure, as well as his own inability to identify this unknown new darkness, for the tragedies. Strange to blame the upperclassmen's departure when it was Odin himself that arranged the ill-fated voyage, but we'll move on as he does. Odin insists that the sacrifices of all the others must not be in vain. Ericus shows regretful reverence by evoking the names of those he believed to have passed. Erd and Omod lost in the darkness, Bragi and Baldr, who presumably fell in the underworld. But at the mention of Baldr's name, Odin is suddenly very confused. He doesn't inform Xehanort or Ericus of his thought process, but he must be wondering, how could these two have crossed paths with Baldr when Odin had kept Baldr isolated in the infirmary? There's no time to ponder this question, because without warning, the castle begins to quake. The world is under attack. But this may be another event that Master Odin had a level of foresight about, because his next words are, "So it begins." He orders Ericus and Xehanort to remain here, as he summons the ancient no-name Keyblade from its position on the wall, despite already being shown to be the wielder of the Master Defender, implying that whether Odin knew of the hidden truth behind the blade or not, the Master of Masters was about to get a front row viewing of everything that was about to happen. Odin left the classroom to go evacuate the remaining students, confirming the presence of other classes besides the two that Dark Road is centered upon. We will touch on Odin's knowledge again later, but for now, the time had come for Xehanort to come clean about his earlier suspicions. Ericus is a few steps behind Xehanort, but is still able to follow all the clues to the same conclusion. Baldr fell to darkness after losing his sister, and is the one responsible for the deaths of so many of their friends. The young boy who believes in the light in people's hearts is being truly tested here, but knows what he needs to do. With raw determination on his face, Ericus charges off, intent on purging the darkness from Baldr's heart. Scala ad Caem is suffering attacks from multiple occasions at once. Either Baldr is warping and blasting indiscriminately, or he has summoned forces of darkness to help him in his raid. At least things seem calm by the water's edge, and Xehanort and Ericus take a brief moment to reflect. Their journey began right here, not even 2 weeks prior, but with everything that has transpired, it may as well have been a lifetime ago. Ericus snaps back to the present, and is adamant that he cannot lose any more friends, beseeching Xehanort's help to ensure that Baldr is saved, not slain, regardless of what he has done. Xehanort agrees, and immediately afterwards, Vidar, Vala, and Vali finally make their return to Scala ad Caem, appearing through a corridor of light. Vidar wants to know what has happened, and when Xehanort delivers the news of Baldr's descent into darkness, Vidar shamefully reveals that he already knows, but had believed that Baldr would never go after any of his own classmates. Xehanort is surprised, and Vidar apologizes for being unable to bring himself to take Baldr's life. Ericus is appalled, however, and blames Vidar for failing to protect Hoda, believing Hoda's death to be the inciting event that led to all of this chaos and turmoil in the first place, and draws his Keyblade in anger against his older contemporaries. Xehanort warns Ericus not to let his heart give in to anger and fall to darkness, just as Baldr had, but Ericus is fine with embracing his anger, and reminds Xehanort that he had pledged to help Ericus in his goals. Xehanort reluctantly concedes, and the 5 wielders begin an emotionally charged, but ultimately pointless battle that leaves all participants exhausted. With the battle seemingly at a standstill, the wielders take a moment to catch their breath, but the furious Ericus spies the opportunity for a sneak attack and leaps forward. However, Xehanort blocks the attack and subsequent strike, managing to talk some calm and sense back into his partner. Finally, the group can talk, and Vidar commiserates with Ericus's disbelief that Baldr could ever fall to darkness. Vidar did not want to accept that as the truth either. He wanted to believe that one of the true darknesses had returned and possessed Baldr, and was unwilling to make the difficult choice that could have ended this matter once and for all when he had the chance. That's why he was willing to risk it all on the power of Kingdom Hearts to purge that darkness from the hopefully faultless boy. But now, Vidar has given up. Even if he could summon Kingdom Hearts, he wouldn't. When push came to shove, the cost truly was too great. Again, he was unable to stand up and make an immensely difficult decision that could potentially affect the lives of people everywhere. That's actually what the upperclassmen have returned to announce: their abandonment of their quest for the Seven Lights to summon Kingdom Hearts. In fact, Ver should be on her way to the top of the tower right now to tell Master Odin directly. This news is enough for Baldr to bring himself out of hiding, and braggadociously announce his disappointment that Vidar had failed to gather the Seven Lights. For the first time, Xehanort and Ericus can truly see that their friend has been taken by the darkness. And deep within Xehanort's heart, Hodor cries out in pain at the sight. Baldr is glad that Xehanort didn't announce his suspicions too early, and Ericus pledges to Baldr that he will bring him back to the light. Baldr's darkness completely obscures its host, taunting Ericus with the knowledge that it and Baldr are one and the same now. There's no way to destroy one without the other. Vidar finally concedes that he has no other choice, and the upperclassmen prepare to face off against the fallen wielder. But Baldr has no intention of battling them here, and summons a squadron of pure-blood Heartless to keep the five wielders occupied, before warping away to the top of the tower to add the isolated Ver to his list of victims. The upperclassmen dispatch the Heartless in moments before giving chase on foot, with Xehanort and Ericus in hot pursuit right behind them. Baldr gleefully reaches his target, and Ver expresses her condolences for Baldr's sister, asking if this has all been because of her. And here, Baldr's darkness finally reveals that Hoda's death was not what had caused her younger brother's descent into darkness. The darkness within Baldr's heart was itself responsible, and only grew in power and control once it had snuffed Hoda's light out. It delights in revealing that it was the one responsible for the deaths of Heimdall, Helgi, Sigrun, Bragi, Erd, and Hermod, and that Ver will be its 8th victim. It's again curious that the darkness is already claiming Bragi, given that we as the audience know that Bragi has escaped, but perhaps he performed a convincing fake death that was enough to persuade the overconfident Baldr that he had been slain. Ver is mortified, and vows that Baldr will not get away with this, summoning her Keyblade against her former friend. With the darkness as his strength, Baldr effortlessly toys with his opponent, electing to strike her down with an outlandishly flashy attack, which is blocked just in the nick of time by Vidar, Vala, and Vali. Ver passes on Baldr's murderous confession to the upperclassmen, confirming once and for all Vidar's theories about what dark fate had befallen this poor, forsaken boy. But Vidar had no blame to lay upon Baldr's shoulders, claiming much of the responsibility for the tragedy as his own. The darkness knew a way to make amends, though. The upperclassmen could accept their fated death by its hands as atonement for their failings. Vali, Vala, and Vidar pledged to send the possessed boy into the next life peacefully in Hoda's honor, uttering the ancient Keyblade wielder mantra, "May your heart be your guiding key," as they begin their assault. Xehanort and Ericus finally arrive to see the battle in full swing, and it looks like Baldr is on the back foot. He bends over and breathes deeply, and though Ver is clearly worn down, the older students seem to be far more composed. Now, with the arrival of 2 more wielders of light, things aren't looking good for Baldr. Vidar readies his blade to deal the final strike, but Baldr suddenly cries out in pain as the darkness within violently bursts forth as an enormous emblem Heartless, Hringhorn, a creature fittingly named after the fabled ship that belonged to the Baldr of Norse mythology. Within an instant, Baldr and the creature warp to behind the exhausted Ver, instantly assuming an offensive configuration and readying themselves to grab a quick kill. With a mighty slash, Hringhorn lashes out again, but instead of Ver, it has struck the trio of upperclassmen who gave their lives to defend Ver once more. Hringhorn returns to defense mode as the 3 upperclassmen begin to fade away, and the forlorn lowerclassmen can only mourn as Baldr's darkness greedily claims his 8th, 9th, and 10th victims. In his final moments, Vidar apologizes. The responsibility of taking Baldr's life has fallen to Xehanort and Ericus now. Hringhorn moves forward to attack once more, and as Ericus and Xehanort hold back its blades, Ver attempts to strike down the distracted Baldr. But that is exactly what he wanted. Dark power wells within the boy's body, and with one swift, fatal strike it is released, piercing Ver and sending her flying across the room. She lands with a harsh thud, and begins to fade away as Xehanort and Ericus rush to her side, As she disappears, Ver apologizes for leaving her classmates behind and traveling with Vidar. Among her friends, that's where she feels she belongs. Her body fades and her heart floats away. Hopefully she will be joining her friends very soon. Ericus and Xehanort shed tears. Despite already losing so many, this was the first time that their lack of strength had led directly to a friend's death, and it was a particularly sweet, innocent friend that they had wanted so badly to protect. 11 lights have now fallen. The showboating darkness wanted to claim its final 2 victims in a place worthy of the occasion, and warped away to the very peak of the tower, knowing Ericus and Xehanort would show no hesitation in following. At the highest summit of the entire world, Baldr's darkness greeted the new arrivals, claiming that the 13 darknesses would be assembled here and now. Xehanort and Ericus were confused, and Baldr's darkness finally revealed to them its true plan. It wanted Kingdom Hearts to be summoned. It wanted the worlds to be purged, because when the uncontrollable force of Kingdom Hearts was unleashed in an uncontrolled state upon the worlds, everything would be destroyed, and eventually reborn in darkness. Vidar's plan to summon Kingdom Hearts would not have merely purged the darkness within Baldr's heart, as he had been led to believe. In fact, the darkness had been laying a path for Vidar to succeed in assembling the 7 lights all along. This darkness was initially a mere shadow on Baldr's heart, something that Baldr could never so much as acknowledge for fear of eradication. But when it seized the opportunity and struck down Hoda, its plan to secure a future for itself was put into motion. It knew that Vidar would be bound to seek revenge on whatever dark force had claimed her life. But when Vidar found out that Baldr was the one responsible, the darkness knew that Vidar would be incapable of claiming vengeance, and it either made a correct, educated guess, or somehow knew with confidence that Master Odin would inform Vidar about Kingdom Hearts, and the method of assembling 7 lights to summon it. Heimdall, Helgi, and Sigrun's deaths were additional incentive for Vidar to carry out his mission, but they were also part of the backup plan in case he failed. And when Vidar and the upperclassmen began to waver in their goal of assembling those important lights, the darkness understood that it had to step in and commit to Plan B. Because in addition to leading Vidar down its intended path, the darkness has also been working in the background to plunge 13 lights into shadow, its own method of summoning Kingdom Hearts. Now this may sound different to the method that Vidar was employing, or methods that we have previously seen in the series for that matter, but to me, it sounds like there are many valid pathways towards summoning Kingdom Hearts that may differ only in interpretation, not so much execution. Vidar was told that Kingdom Hearts could be summoned by gathering 7 pure lights that shone within the darkness of chaos. That sounds a lot like gathering 7 hearts of pure light, that when assembled, would unlock the door that leads to an artificial iteration of Kingdom Hearts. Vidar was even beginning his task by seeking out important items in Agrabah and Beast Castle, the homeworlds of Princess Jasmine and Belle respectively, 2 who will eventually be known as Princesses of Heart. Baldr's method was for himself, a being of darkness, to take 13 lights and successfully clash with them, claiming their lives, and apparently resulting in the summoning of Kingdom Hearts. KH3 spoilers again, but I ask, how is that any different from technically 7 lights, but let's be real here, basically only 1 light, clashing with 13 darknesses, which allows the summoning of Kingdom Hearts? A significant conflict born of light and darkness seems to be sufficient to at least summon Kingdom Hearts. However, mastering and utilizing its incredible power is only possible with possession of the true, complete Keyblade. Maybe I'm wrong here, but I feel like a lot of the message of Dark Road is that light and darkness vary mainly in perspective, but they are very much 2 sides of the same coin when you get down to it. It's not like Kingdom Hearts itself comes with an instruction manual. I mean, we've already seen 3, possibly 4 different Kingdom Hearts with distinctly different summoning methods appear across Key, Birth by Sleep, and the 3 numbered titles. So I wouldn't get too hung up on the exact semantics here. Though if you disagree with my theory, I'd like to hear your thoughts, and I'd be happy to dive into this topic in its own video if you are interested. In any case, Dark Road asserts that 13 lights being snuffed out by darkness would have been sufficient in summoning Kingdom Hearts, and here, at the climax of Dark Road itself, Baldr believes he is already 11/13ths of the way towards achieving that goal. Just Ericus and Xehanort left to go. Baldr becomes engulfed by darkness, assuming the form of Hringhorn once more. After an intense battle, the Heartless recedes back within Baldr, and the 3 wielders gasp for breath, exhausted. Xehanort falls to his knees, and Baldr readies himself to claim number 12, But Ericus is able to use the last of his strength to block the strike, and both attacker and defender fall to the floor, completely drained of energy. Ericus sees their chance, and commands Xehanort to drive the darkness out of Baldr's heart. Xehanort rises and walks towards their fallen foe, standing above him with Keyblade outstretched. A beam of light begins to glow at the end of his weapon, but as Xehanort considers his choices, he stops, and the light is dispelled. Xehanort raises his Keyblade up high and prepares to drive it home through his foe, as Ericus pleads with his friend to reconsider. As Xehanort hesitates, Baldr seizes on that reluctance and unleashes a cloud of darkness that ushers the two into a shroud of shadows, where they can talk alone. The darkness insists that Xehanort's assumptions are wrong. It is not one of the 13 true darknesses, as Xehanort has been led to believe. To prove this, it attempts to draw a parallel between itself and Xehanort, questioning if Xehanort can honestly claim that his heart possesses no traces of shadows. Does Xehanort really believe he is like all the others? Does he possess a heart of brilliant light that shines like the rest? No. Baldr can see inside Xehanort's heart even now, and there is no doubt about it. He and Xehanort are one and the same. Their role is to stand beside the lights, Baldr with Hoda, Xehanort with Ericus, but beget shadows in their wake with their mere presence. And should those lights disappear, they are destined to be swallowed by the very darkness they themselves cast. Xehanort tries to deny the accusations, but the darkness doubles down on its claims. It is not one of the ancient darknesses, but a being made manifest from the collective terror of the unknown that lay within the hearts and minds of all the Keyblade wielders. The empathetic Baldr was the perfect incubator to grow this being and see it fully realized as its own distinct entity. And Baldr's darkness was not the only one. It claimed that all forms of darkness, true darkness included, have been able to grow in strength and number over the years as a result of their entanglement within people's hearts. Baldr's claims have rattled Xehanort, but he regains his composure and readies himself. No matter what this darkness is or what it has planned, this all ends when Xehanort strikes it down. But the darkness again knows that even now, Xehanort cannot bring himself to take Baldr's life, just as Vidar failed to do so before him, and that inability to do what must be done to achieve their goals is the reason why all of these sacrifices were even necessary in the first place. From the moment of its creation, the darkness wanted the worlds purged by Kingdom Hearts, and to bring about this goal, it devised an initial plot that only required one victim, Hoda. If everything went to plan, this should have caused a chain reaction that led to Vidar summoning Kingdom Hearts under his own volition, and even though all worlds would have been greatly affected, perhaps even catastrophically so in the process, no additional lives would have been directly required to see it through. But when Vidar faltered in his goal of assembling 7 true lights, that is when the sacrifices of all these Keyblade wielders became a necessary means to the darkness's ends. To me, it sounds like the darkness is saying that it didn't even necessarily want to take all these lives. It actually sounds outright angry at Xehanort that it even had to do so. But unlike Vidar or Ericus, or evidently even Xehanort, it was willing to do whatever it took to achieve its goal. After hearing all that Baldr's darkness had to say, Xehanort responds by telling his foe to hold on to that anger, and Baldr is a little confused. Baldr had said that Xehanort was just like him, and it seems like Baldr was more correct than he realized. Because it seems like Xehanort was now finally ready to shoulder that burden, and do what needed to be done. But perhaps the lingering Hoda sensed the shift within Xehanort's demeanor, and knew that her brother's life was genuinely in danger, because this was the moment at which she finally stirred from within Xehanort's heart, her voice speaking from within, and urging the true Baldr to stay strong. At the sound of his sister's voice, Baldr's entire facial expression, body language, and tone of voice changed. I think that now, for the first time since the infirmary, Baldr himself was once again the dominant force in control of his own body. Hoda projected herself forth from Xehanort's heart, veiled in light, and able to maintain her original appearance despite lacking a true body, and she immediately apologized to her brother for causing him so much pain. Baldr apologized too. If he hadn't chased after Hoda, she might never have been struck down. But Hoda holds her brother no ill will at all, and wants to use this brief opportunity to remind Baldr that the world isn't such a bad place. But Baldr had not become corrupted by the evils of the world as Hoda might have assumed, and with pure anguish on his face, Baldr told his sister of the things we had discussed earlier. Baldr's descent was a result of his heart sinking into the abyss of the negativity that he was absorbing from others, made all the more worse when he peered back into the hearts that he was hoping to cleanse. He had realized that there were two kinds of people in the world, and though it seemed like everyone else around him was, he was not the type of person with a heart that radiated light, and his animosity towards those that were drove him further into the pit of despair. And most of all, he was terrified of what would happen when he was left behind by his sister and her protective light, the only thing that could repel this encroaching darkness within him. Xehanort sees some logic in Baldr's theory that there are two kinds of people in this world, as Hoda steps towards her brother with arm outstretched. It's alright, she's here now. He doesn't have to be afraid anymore. Baldr lets down his guard and reaches out his arm as well. But as the two siblings look in each other's eyes, they see the truth, and both instantly brandish their blades to each other's throat. To me, Baldr has realized that all this talk is pointless. As said earlier, Hoda is a person with very similar values to Ericus. To a person like this, darkness is evil and must be eradicated, and there is absolutely zero room for any conflicting ideologies. She will offer comfort to a younger sibling in his final moments, but ultimately, she alone possesses the conviction to carry out the sentence that no one else seems to be able to perform. How ironic that Vidar could not bring himself to harm Baldr for fear of dishonoring Hoda and her memory, and yet, in Vidar's refusal to swing the blade, in the end, he thrust responsibility for the deed back upon Hoda herself. Baldr surely knows of his sister's black and white ideology, knows that her olive branch cannot be sincere, and as soon as he sees the look in her eyes, what choice does he have but to summon his own blade to defend himself? He notably summons his keyblade a moment after hers is drawn, and he does not strike at her, merely maintains the standstill. But Baldr's action is more than enough to convince Hoda that her perspective was correct. Her brother belongs to the darkness now. Baldr muttered that he knew Hoda would never understand, his perfect sister and her heart of radiant light. Hoda's own actions have ironically validated the very fears that Baldr had been harboring all along, the very terrors that caused Baldr to chase after Hoda in the first place. If no light remained to keep darkness from engulfing Baldr's heart, even Hoda herself would show him the exact same level of mercy as any other tainted wretch of darkness. Despite how long I have taken to talk about all of this has all happened so fast, and Xehanort desperately cries out for the clashing siblings to wait. And as soon as her host utters his plea, Hoda halts all movement, almost as if she has been frozen in place. Her keyblade slowly slips from her loosened grip, falls to the floor, and is dispelled, and Baldr is stunned at the turn of events. I, again, invite other interpretations of this scene apart from my own, but I think that what has happened here is that Xehanort has finally seen that the true Baldr does still exist, despite how endlessly deep beneath the darkness his heart lies. When Hoda threatened Baldr's life, Xehanort had a visceral reaction and yearned for her to stop. And because Xehanort's body was the willing conduit through which Hoda was able to project herself, when Xehanort decided for her to stop, she stopped. His feelings completely immobilized his guest. We have seen people appearing through another person's body many times in the series before. Note the repeated visual language of the soft golden glow that accompanies a person appearing outside of the body they are inhabiting. But for a specific example of a host being able to prevent their occupant from moving, we can actually look all the way back to the original Kingdom Hearts. When Riku surrendered his body to Ansem the Seeker of Darkness in Hollow Bastion, his own heart was sidelined, and Ansem's heart fully took control of the vessel, even outwardly altering its appearance to those who observed him. But when Kairi was threatened, Riku was able to temporarily exert enough control to force his body to halt, and despite Ansem's efforts to regain control, Riku had given Kairi, Donald, and Goofy enough time to escape. In the case of Xehanort and Hoda, granted, the roles are reversed when compared to my Kingdom Hearts 1 example, but I still think this is the most logical explanation. When Hoda's Keyblade fell, she was rendered utterly defenseless, and when Baldr realized this, he could have easily finished her off, but chose not to. He lowered his Keyblade, and I'd like to think that when Hoda saw this, maybe her perspective finally did soften here. her brother did not immediately rush to attack her. Perhaps there was still some good in him after all. As Xehanort's control over Hoda loosened, Hoda did not struggle to immediately arm herself once more, but instead reached out her arms in a genuine act of kind-heartedness, and Baldr raised his right arm to return the reconciliatory gesture. But the darkness within Baldr's heart did not give him the chance, and immediately seized control back from its victim, disparaging the poor boy and his so-called weak heart. Now notably appearing visibly out of sync with Baldr for the first time since the initial possession, the darkness forces its thrall to leap into the air, preparing a lethal strike that would destroy Hoda, putting an end to the one thing that seemed to threaten the darkness's hold over its vessel. But at the apex of his jump, Baldr was suddenly struck and ensnared within a set of glowing golden chains, confusing everyone and causing the dark shroud to recede. We can see that Ericus is still close to the ground after colliding with Baldr, meaning the entire previous obscured conversation must have taken place within only a few seconds, and in that time, Master Odin had finally arrived, and from the tip of the no-name keyblade he wielded, he was producing binding chains to contain the darkness, a technique that his pupil will one day adopt and pass on to students of his own. Anyway, my apologies. Odin was struggling to maintain his restraint over Baldr, and commanded Xehanort to seize this one chance and quickly rid him of the darkness. And this time, even Ericus seemed to support the decision. Though he seemed steadfast in his resolution earlier, perhaps Baldr's words, or the knowledge that the real Baldr was buried within this vessel had given Xehanort pause, and now he stood silently, staring at the floor to quickly think. Hoda looks back and sees Xehanort's hesitation. Their one opportunity is slipping away. There's no time to debate this further. It's up to her. Hoda re-summons her blade, jumps up, and delivers a two-handed slash down hard on her brother, who had managed to wiggle his left hand free just enough to prepare his own blade and retaliate with a simultaneous upswing. Hoda's strike against her supposedly defenseless foe was a purely offensive one, and though her blade had rung true, she had not come away unscathed, and both brother and sister's weapons disperse as their owners fell to the floor. This was the end of Hoda. What corporeal form she was able to muster faded into light, and her heart floated off into the sky. The defeated darkness had one final message for Xehanort, a message that I hope you'll allow me to briefly extrapolate on. There are people in this world that belong to the light. Then, there are the other kind, those like Baldr and Xehanort that serve as a sponge to mop up the excess darkness. The people of this light-based society are taught so relentlessly that the light they pledge themselves to is good, and that darkness is unreservedly evil. Any instance of it is wrong and must be eradicated. There is never any room for discussion. When the two opposing forces meet, of course conflict immediately arises. So, it's reasonable to assume that if a person of light has a goal, it will usually involve defeating or suppressing darkness in some way. And if they use the power of the light to achieve those goals, well, that's only natural and accepted by this society. But if a person like Xehanort or Baldr even attempts to pursue a goal that steers even slightly away from the light, even more towards the middle, everyone loses their minds and immediately concludes that they must be using the power of darkness to achieve their dark, aka evil, ends. They're awful, emotionless monsters. They'll stop at nothing to achieve those evil goals, and they must be exterminated at all costs. Baldr's darkness sought to purge and reset the worlds, yes, but to be created in a society where it is feared and would be hunted down for the mere crime of existing, is it that unreasonable to understand where it's coming from? As I said earlier, I don't think the darkness even necessarily wanted to hunt down the 13 lights, and even seemed angry that it was left with no other alternative. Baldr's darkness sees a kindred spirit in Xehanort and beseeches him. Seek answers to these injustices of the world. Seek answers to the darkness, before both boy and shadow collapse. Xehanort slowly walks towards Baldr, takes a deep breath, raises his blade, closes his eyes, and strikes. Baldr cries out in pain as the body fades into particles of light and as the darkness disperses into equivalent particles of darkness. Baldr's heart, free from both light and darkness, floats skyward, just as his sisters and classmates before him had. Ericus feels bad for Xehanort and the burden that was placed upon him, and Master Odin speaks softly, as neither Xehanort nor Ericus seem to hear his voice. I finally see the truth of those words. Destiny can be so cruel. Whatever prophetic words Odin is referring to, we do not get to hear them ourselves in Dark Road. All we can infer is that after everything that has happened, Odin has achieved an understanding that he was not able to until now. Again, Missing Link will surely address my many questions about Master Odin, but I feel like the implication is that Odin has some level of foresight about this time period and the events that have just transpired. The Book of Prophecies is the most likely answer to this mystery. After all, the no-name Keyblade has been close by for essentially the entire story, and we know that the tome itself is intentionally written to be vague and confusing at best, and it certainly does not go into the details of any specific person's fate. I'd say that Master Odin, at the very least, knows that at around this time, a new form of darkness would arise in the world, and that when all was said and done, one known as the Dark Seeker would emerge, a person of great importance to the events that were said to transpire later in the book. I'd even go so far as to wager that all of Odin's actions, the questionable mark of mastery, the spoon-feeding of information about the true darkness and the methods of summoning Kingdom Hearts, the specific withholding of other information, and the interventions that always seem to come far too late, all of these were done in order to ensure that the Dark Seeker was brought into the world as was prophesized. The very same Dark Seeker who will one day attempt to summon Kingdom Hearts in likely this very same location. 12 Keyblade wielders had lost their lives to see it through, but now the task was done. Whatever relevant, prophetic words Odin spoke of have evidently come to pass and revealed their true hidden meaning. Destiny can be so cruel. 1 month later, Xehanort visited the Skarland graveyard, a field covered in what seemed like endless headstones. He laid flowers atop 4 graves for his fellow lower classmen, Umod, Erd, Bragi, and Vor, before crossing the dividing pathway and laying out more for Vidar, Vala, Vali, Heimdall, Helgi, and Sigrun. He adorned the final grave with 2 sets of flowers. Of course, in the Kingdom Hearts series, no body is left behind when a person is struck down, and so Xehanort is symbolically laying both Hoda and Baldr in the same location, so that they may never be apart again, that they'll always have her light to share. I won't ask the question of whether all of these graves stand in the memory of victims of Baldr's rampage, but one must wonder what is going through Xehanort's mind right now. Of course, none of this was actually his fault, but one can only imagine that certain thoughts have crossed his mind. Xehanort had genuine suspicions of Baldr as early as the Olympus Colosseum. If he had only spoken up sooner, if he had not been afraid to confront that awful truth, if he had put his task on hold, united with Umod and Erd and returned to Baldr and Bragi in the underworld, making the difficult choice to accuse Baldr of foul play, then perhaps so much of this tragedy could have been avoided. Ericus arrives shortly after with a bouquet of his own, and the pair catch up. Apparently Xehanort has barely left his room in the last month. Ericus has been heard crying night after night in his own chambers, and Master Odin is hardly more than a glum old man these days, barely recognizable from the person he was before all this happened. I'll try not to read anything into Ericus' words here and banish any thoughts that Odin could have been possessed out of my mind. What we do know is that Odin is apparently already looking towards Xehanort and Ericus' own Mark of Mastery exam. He ceased taking on new Keyblade Master apprentices and wants this pair to take over for him so he can leave this world for a nice cozy one and retire. Apparently he thinks it's time for a change. Xehanort concurs. Ericus changes the subject to chess and challenges Xehanort to one more game, and the pair exchange some light banter as Ericus already knows that Xehanort will eventually say yes. As Ericus begins walking upstairs to the classroom, Xehanort smiles and agrees to the game before closing his eyes. He says quietly under his breath that he hopes Ericus holds on to his dreams of the light. Now, this actually confused me at first, because I am 99% sure that Xehanort is referring to a scene that takes place 2 years after this one. The final episode of Dark Road opened with a flash forward to 2 years after the events of the main plot, and I believe that for this penultimate scene, this is meant to be a nice little callback to that moment to close out the story. However, lore-wise, I think Xehanort is demonstrating his ability to see into the hearts of those close to him, and even though he and Ericus will not actually discuss these particular dreams for 2 more years, Ericus's is already firmly marked upon his heart. Xehanort doesn't have to worry in the way that Baldr did. Ericus's dream is to remain a loyal beacon of light to those that might be wandering astray in the darkness. So even if Xehanort were to lose his way one day, Ericus would always be there to rescue him. As the pair leave the graveyard to the east, a cloaked person steps in from the west. The figure approaches calmly, unseen by the two that had just departed, and stopped in front of Baldr's grave. The person lamented that Baldr wasn't the one they were looking for after all. Their chosen one had not yet appeared. But this escapade had not been for naught, as Xehanort himself might be useful to their plans one day. The stranger pulls back their hood, kindly allowing the audience to see that Bragi was the mysterious figure wearing the cloak. At this time, we are also treated to a flashback that illuminates more on the brief showdown between Bragi and Baldr seen earlier. I already explained most of it as it chronologically happened, but I didn't elaborate on the true importance of that scene at that time in order to not ruin the reveal for anyone who has not played Kingdom Hearts 3 yet, and I'll reiterate that same warning now. I hoped all those people have stopped watching by now, because Bragi is heavily implied to be the latest in an extremely long list of stolen vessels of the Master of Masters' 6th apprentice, Luxu. This time posing incognito as a brand new Keyblade wielder. The talk of vessels and keeping this current body should have made this apparent enough, but the clincher was of course the, dare I say iconic, use of the phrase, "as if," that his other well-known vessel, Braig/Xigbar, has used on numerous occasions. It's not exactly clear if Baldr believed that he actually did kill Bragi. I mean, we did see Bragi suffering quite a large attack in a flashback, so I think it is very possible that Bragi, or I suppose Luxu, faked his death and slipped away unseen to continue observing events from afar, just as he had done in the Age of Fairy Tales. The last time we chronologically saw Luxu was in the ancient past, and he had just sent something that he referred to as a seed of light forward through time, the true dandelion. He then had a discussion with the 13th Ancient Darkness that seemed like it was building to some sort of violent outcome, and then shortly afterwards spoke to the Union leader Brain right after Brain had sent 4 friends of his own into the future. By his own reports, he claims to have bestowed the no-name Keyblade onto a Union leader at this point and taken them on as his apprentice, with instructions to eventually pass that Keyblade down again to an apprentice of their own, and so on. He then departed that land Keybladeless and without a copy of the Book of Prophecies to guide him, and naturally progressed through the hundreds if not thousands of years that it would take until the Master of Masters' return, implanting his heart in a new stolen body whenever his current one became too old or inconvenient to keep using. So that brings us back to his line spoken now in the Keyblade graveyard. Bragi had a strong reason to suspect that Baldr was the so-called chosen one that he was looking for. But what does this refer to? Baldr was an empath, as we have discussed many times already, so I suppose that means that he partially fits the description of the Child of Destiny that I mentioned all the way back at the beginning of this video. Could that tie in with the true dandelion seed that he planted earlier? Maybe, but I think the true answer lies in the Kingdom Hearts 3 secret reports. As said, Luxu was not granted a Book of Prophecies to accompany him on his task, but the Master of Masters must have left him some level of instructions for his pupil, because Luxu would know that the Master of Masters' return was imminent by the arrival of this so-called Chosen One. He refers specifically to a Chosen One in those exact words, as they are someone that will eventually come into possession of Luxu's no-name Keyblade and reenact the Keyblade War, facilitating the return of the Foretellers and then the Master of Masters himself. Baldr did come extremely close. He plunged 10 lights into darkness, and if he managed to take down Xehanort, Ericus, and I suppose Odin as well, that would have made 13. Plus it would have allowed him to claim no name at the same time, fulfilling all the report's criteria, so it's understandable that Luxu would have considered him. But even though Luxu only considered Xehanort as being potentially useful at the moment, well, in about 65 years' time, Luxu will be convinced that Xehanort is indeed the one he is looking for. Xehanort soon inherits no name from Master Odin, and Luxu will eventually step in and intervene directly in Xehanort's life once more, offering his services in exchange for the false desire of being bequeathed a Keyblade in another stolen guise as a man named Braig. Xehanort will then split his heart into 13 vessels, have those 13 darknesses clash with 7 lights, and as a result, is able to summon Kingdom Hearts, enabling the Master of Masters' return as prophesized. But for now, the usefulness of the vessel of Bragi is lessening. It sounds like Lucia will remain Bragi for a little longer, but if he wants to continue keeping a close eye on the Master of Masters' Keyblade, he'll need a new appearance soon, as everyone in this world believes that Bragi is already dead. With Xehanort's displayed ability to peer into hearts though, one must wonder if Lucia will take some level of precautions when presenting himself to Xehanort some 65 years from now. One plotline running throughout Kingdom Hearts 3 concerns the location of the Black Box, an unknown place that even Lucia himself seems to be searching for. I have theorized in the past that perhaps Lucia was able to segment his heart in such a way that the knowledge was hidden even from himself, so that when Xehanort peered into his heart, or even implanted his heart into Lucia directly, that Xehanort would not immediately be able to figure out that this oddly opportunistic stranger, Braig, was far more than he appeared to be. This is technically the end of the main story of Dark Road itself. However, as has been mentioned before, this story also features several flash forwards that further connect the events of this series and allude to the events of future titles as well, and I don't think I'd be fully explaining Kingdom Hearts Dark Road if I didn't cover at least some of those as well. 1 year after the main events of Kingdom Hearts Dark Road had concluded, Master Odin decided that the time had come for Xehanort and Ericus to begin their preparations for the Mark of Mastery exam. Just as the upperclassmen had ill-fated done 1 year prior, the pair were both to explore the outside worlds and broaden their horizons before undertaking the test itself. As Xehanort trudged through the corridors of darkness to his destination, he realized how different his emotional state was now compared to when he first embarked with his friends to search for the upperclassmen. Or maybe these feelings were born when he took that initial step down this road 3 years prior, when the man in the brown cloak first set him on this path through the darkness. Back then, he'd felt horrible emotions as he walked. Hatred, jealousy, doubt, but didn't realize at the time that these emotions belonged to people that he had yet to meet, and some were even directed at him. This initial journey was the point at which the first traces of darkness began to sprout within Xehanort's heart. Now, 3 years later, Xehanort walked these roads again, but even though he was clad in armor this time, each voyage allowed the darkness to seep a little further into his heart. But maybe that was okay. If his heart was strong enough, if he was the child of destiny that his original guardian always told him that he was, then the darkness should not be able to conquer him. Xehanort dispelled his Keyblade armor and allowed a cloud of darkness to wash over him. However, this was a huge mistake. Within seconds he was overcome and collapsed within this turbulent tunnel. All was not lost, as within mere moments of his fall, Xehanort was approached by another man in a black cloak, none other than the Master of Masters himself, addressing Xehanort as the Singularity. The Master rescued the young wielder and took him to the Keyblade graveyard, and in his whimsical and mysterious way, startled Xehanort as he regained consciousness. And here, the two engaged in one of the more interesting conversations of the entire series. The Master refuses to identify himself, stating that he could introduce himself as Theodore or Jack, but without any proof to back up his words, what's the point? He also refuses to elaborate on just why he happened to be walking through the extremely hostile corridors of darkness at the exact right time and place that Xehanort needed help. He tells Xehanort that he used to be a Keyblade wielder, more or less, despite not being familiar with the concept of the Mark of Mastery exam, and even seems repulsed by the idea of traveling the worlds to broaden one's horizons, further fueling Xehanort's suspicions about his mysterious savior. To support his claims, the Master beckons Xehanort's blade into his own hands before physically handing the weapon back to the bewildered boy. This is an interesting display. We have never seen a Keyblade wielder able to exercise any level of control over another person's Keyblade before, unless of course they feasibly had some claim to the blades themselves. Riku was the true original owner of the Kingdom Key, Sora technically is Roxas in many ways, so these two examples make sense, and we're not even going to talk about what happened here. So unless the Master of Masters ends up being related to Xehanort himself in some way, perhaps the implication is that the Master has dominion over all lesser Keyblades. The Master warns Xehanort against attempting to travel through the corridors of darkness unprotected, and grants Xehanort with his first Dark Cloak, advising that the older style garment will offer far less physical defense than the fancy new Keyblade armor, but in exchange, it will provide far more protection against the darkness. In return, the Master only wants Xehanort to observe what lies in the hearts of others as he journeys through the worlds. He equates the feelings that one might experience towards someone they love as not always being good or well-meaning, calling them a false kind of light, and questioning whether such feelings could still be thought of as light or darkness. The Master seems to categorize all people within two camps, those with power and those without, but regardless, all hearts are capable of harboring darkness. Those with power exhibit the sin of pride and judge those below them, while those without power envy those above them. The darkness that lurks within all hearts is allowed to rise to the surface when dragging others down, when attaining power by seizing it from someone else. The Master wonders aloud in his own manipulative way, which type of person Xehanort is. Someone with power or someone without? One of the strong or one of the weak? Xehanort doesn't want to indulge in the Master's pontifications of assigning people into two extreme categories. And even if he was to fall into either of these supposed types, that wouldn't actually mean that he carries darkness. But the Master questions if Xehanort's assertion is actually true. Can he say the Master is wrong after all that he has seen so far? Xehanort has no answer. The Master claims that observing people's hearts will help with Xehanort's ongoing task of broadening his horizons, and promises to wait right here until Xehanort returns to hear all about it. So, clearly, the Master of Masters has deemed Xehanort important enough to personally interfere directly in his life. It's important to remember that this man is an enigma in so many ways, always performing whatever role is necessary to manipulate those around him into doing what he wants them to do. It's unclear how long the Master's Keyblade hung in the Scala Adkayam classroom, how many students were observed and assessed for their suitability as pawns within the Master of Masters schemes. But make no mistake, the Master was obviously not in the lanes between coincidentally when Xehanort needed help, nor did he just happen to be carrying a spare dark coat. Every word of their initial and subsequent conversation was carefully selected to ensure the Master's plans came to fruition. But how did the Master even show up at this time? As far as we've been told so far, the Master of Masters' plan was to set the events of the Keyblade War into motion, then time travel forward until the point in the future where he could reap the rewards. Lushu's grand task was to physically wait through the eons until someone was successfully able to recreate the Keyblade War, as this event would facilitate the return of both the Foretellers and the Master of Masters. But yet, here the Master stands, almost a century early, maneuvering perhaps his most important chess piece yet. Assuming the Master of Masters obeys the laws of time travel, he would need a medium, memories, and a waypoint to arrive at this time. Lushu clearly exists at this time, as does the no-name Keyblade that has observed all of Xehanort's life since he arrived at Scala Adkayam, so no rules on that end should be broken. The only question is, why is Xehanort important enough to leap out of time for? And even beyond that, why was saving Xehanort's life performed in secret? Why was the Master's most trusted pupil Lushu, a man who has spent an eternity faithfully awaiting the Master's return, forbidden from knowing that the Master had leapt out of time earlier than Lushu was told that he would? The way that the Master referred to Xehanort as the singularity is very telling. For my math nerds, in physics, a singularity is defined at the point at which a function takes on an infinite value, a common example of which is the infinite density of matter found at the precise center of a black hole. We know that Xehanort's journey began when he was visited by a person in a brown cloak that set him down this dark path. A path that will eventually lead him to becoming the very man in the brown cloak that sends his past self down that same road once more. An infinite loop with no beginning and no end. A loop that can only exist once because it existed always. Perhaps being such a person meets the Master's definition of a singularity. But of course, Xehanort is also the one who will successfully recreate the Keyblade War, an event that the Master will have seen clear as day as he peered through his Keyblade into the future. At the culmination of Kingdom Hearts 3, Xehanort first defeats the 13 Lights as planned, before Sora is able to tear a hole in the fabric of time itself and overwrite the Light Side's defeat, giving them another chance at victory. Yet even after this, Xehanort is still able to forge the Keyblade and summon Kingdom Hearts, before finally being vanquished by Sora and his fellow Keyblade wielders of light. Perhaps this outcome, two simultaneous but contradictory histories existing within the same timeline, is exactly the conclusion that the Master of Masters sought. And perhaps therein lies our answer for the question of why Luxu could not know about the Master's intervention to set Xehanort on this very course. Luxu was forbidden from taking a copy of the Book of Prophecies with him on his century-spanning quest, with the idea being that if Luxu read a copy of the book and knew exactly where and when he was supposed to appear throughout all of time, the very act of knowing his own future would allow him to alter it. Perhaps if Luxu knew with certainty that Xehanort was the scapegoat that would finally spell the end of his task, he may have acted in such a way that might prevent that outcome from occurring at all. After his journey through the worlds that we do not get to see, Xehanort returns to the Keyblade graveyard once more, and viewers that have played Kingdom Hearts 3 will recognize this next section very well, as it is a word-for-word recreation of one of the first scenes in the Remind DLC. Here, the returning Xehanort yet again confers with the Master of Masters, and affirms that his journey to revisit the worlds and observe people's hearts has only solidified his beliefs. Regardless of how faint it may be, darkness lurks within every heart. And just as the Master had alluded to in their prior meeting, this darkness indeed causes inevitable struggles for power within each world. From Xehanort's perspective, the weak indeed usurp the strong in meager attempts to seize power, and perpetuate this endless cycle of chaotic violence as they scramble for control. This must not be allowed to continue. Xehanort says verbatim that he has now learned the reason for his existence, and with the added context of Dark Road, I think we can finally understand precisely what Xehanort means by this. For all of his childhood, Xehanort was taught by his mentor that he was this so-called child of destiny, someone who was born to save the world from darkness. But if he continually observed that darkness lurks within every heart, even in these worlds filled with supposedly abundant light, then how could he fulfill that prophesized role? He had already seen the devastation that could be wrought by just one heart that succumbed to the darkness within. The catastrophe and heartbreak that someone could inflict when attempting to enact their own dark ambitions. Just one heart of darkness had nearly summoned Kingdom Hearts and thrown all worlds into turmoil, and in the infinite expanse of worlds and the countless people within endlessly grasping for power, it could surely happen again. But Xehanort had also seen worlds in which order was forcibly maintained. The citizens of those worlds could have darkness in their hearts, that was fine. It only manifested as insignificant feeble fear anyway. None dared challenge the overwhelming rule of the Queen of Hearts or the order she kept. So rather than allow this perpetually repeating cycle of chaos as the weak vie to disempower the strong, Xehanort's experience told him that it would be better for all people to be ruled by darkness. As Xehanort discusses his beliefs, the Remind version of this cutscene veers away from Xehanort's perspective and arrives on the Master's hands. The Master's left hand is tightly gripped by the right, as if to prevent the Master from outwardly reacting to the news that his latest pawn was following the exact path that was laid out for him. Perhaps, in order to successfully manipulate someone into following this drastic path that culminated in the recreation of the Keyblade War, the Master could not have just simply told Xehanort about all the evils of the world and what Xehanort should do to set things right. But by carefully identifying someone who had experienced all that Xehanort had been through, someone primed to accept exactly the worldview that the Master wanted him to adopt, and by prodding and guiding Xehanort down this path to observe the all-encompassing darkness in people's hearts, Xehanort now unreservedly believed in his destined status. In his mind, he was the child of destiny. He would prevent the chaos of these false lights from consuming the world, and he had an enormous personal stake in ensuring that he succeeded. But as for how to actually make that happen, Xehanort still wasn't sure. With the journey to broaden his horizons almost over, the Mark of Mastery exam wouldn't be too far away now. Perhaps the test itself would grant Xehanort some clarity in how to proceed. But the Master of Masters won't hear it, urging Xehanort to listen to what his heart is telling him, regardless of whatever the Mark of Mastery exam might say. Xehanort believes the world needs him. He should trust in his heart and let it guide his actions. And when Xehanort does listen to his heart, he can feel exactly where it is that he is supposed to go. Between the time when the Master of Masters first rescued Xehanort and now, Xehanort was once again contacted by a future version of himself. The very same heart that had initially set Xehanort upon his journey 3 years ago showed up again now and assisted Xehanort in time traveling forward through time to assemble the 13 vessels that would make up the true Organization 13 seen in Kingdom Hearts 3. Xehanort time traveled forward as instructed and performed all the actions that we saw him perform in Kingdom Hearts Dream Drop Distance, where we referred to him as Young Xehanort to distinguish him among all the other versions of himself that were currently present. His act of travelling forward meant he became a waypoint himself for the hearts of Ansem the Seeker of Darkness, Xemnas, Vanitas, and the Riku Replica to temporarily leave their places within the stories of the various Kingdom Hearts games and guide themselves into the future, to await the arrival of Master Xehanort as his body reformed after the destruction of both his Nobody and Heartless in Kingdom Hearts 1 and 2. But as we saw in Dream Drop Distance, the attempt to unite the 13 vessels on this day was thwarted, as the organization's plan to snag Sora as their 13th and final vessel failed, and young Xehanort's heart, and all the hearts that Xehanort had guided to that point, returned to their original departure points in time. Unfazed and planning for all eventualities, they time traveled forward once more as seen in Kingdom Hearts 3, this time inhabiting replica bodies that allowed them to stay in their non-native times for far longer than the brief moment they thought they would require in Dream Drop Distance. But they were all again defeated by Sora and the Guardians of Light in the final battle at the Keyblade Graveyard, and each returned to their respective times. As per the rules of time travel, young Xehanort remembers none of his journeying throughout time. However, the act of him time traveling into the future has been etched into his heart. His future is now written in stone, and in order to grow into the man that becomes all these others, he must live his life exactly in accordance with his destined path, so as not to cause any paradoxical deviations from the history that requires him to grow and travel backwards in time himself, to send his past self down the exact same road that he was once sent down. Which brings things back to Dark Road. When Xehanort says he can sense where he's supposed to go and what he's supposed to do, well, yes, he probably very literally can. Even the black coat itself seems familiar, which it damn well should, seeing as how often a version of himself will wear it in the future. But the Master of Masters doesn't want Xehanort to get too comfortable in this coat, and again in his manipulative way, states that if Xehanort truly possesses great power, then he needn't fear the darkness forever. In fact, one day, Xehanort will be the one wielding it. Xehanort has finally had enough of these games, and straight out asks, just who or what this clairvoyant and mysterious man is. But the Master dances around the question, again reinforcing his earlier point that words could be misleading, but that the truth is whatever Xehanort actually sees with his eyes. Disregarding this message, Xehanort asks once more for the Master's name, and the exasperated Master finally drops all pretense and actually tells the youth his true name. We, the audience however, are not so fortunate as to actually hear the name, as in both Dark Road and Remind, the subtitle is blanked out, and Remind even goes so far as to mute the Master's word and flash light across the screen as he speaks, almost as if to deliberately show that the word is being censored by an outside force that doesn't yet want us, the viewers, to know. The enigmatic man confirms that he is a lost master, one of the mysterious Keyblade wielders of yore, for whom the ancient Keyblade War was started, just like in Master Odin's favourite story. And as the Master of Masters walks away, his latest pawn, properly placed now on the board and destined to fulfill his wishes, leaves Xehanort with a final message, just as he had with all the other young people who looked up to and trusted him. A mantra that sounds nice and even reassuring on the surface, but in hindsight, seems tinged with the machinations of the Master of Masters every time it is uttered. May your heart be your guiding key.
Aren't hearts great? Steer us wrong every time.
75 years later, soon after his recompletion during the events of Dream Drop Distance, the far older Master Xehanort will look back on this moment and chuckle to himself, now understanding the truth behind the mysterious stranger's words. Ironically, Xigbar doesn't want to hear about any old bedtime stories, urging Xehanort back to his task at hand of assembling the 13 vessels of the real organization. Though if Master Xehanort had been allowed to continue talking, perhaps Xigbar would have pieced together that the old man was talking about his former master. 2 years after the main events of Dark Road, Xehanort and Ericus reunite after their respective journeys to broaden their horizons over their favourite pastime of chess. It was always Ericus's dream to travel the worlds on his own, a dream he was now finally able to realize. But that desire for independence rings so hollowly now that his 5 classmates are no longer here, and isolation is a constant factor of Ericus's daily life. Xehanort's trip, especially his encounters with the Master of Masters, has led him to do a lot of thinking on both the events of the past and his plans for the future. The conclusion that he reached was that one lifetime was simply not enough. And whereas Ericus believed that one should find pupils to carry on one's legacy, he was rather taken aback to hear Xehanort state that he would rather see things through himself. Ericus humors his old friend, wondering just how many lifetimes it would take to see Xehanort's grand ambitions realized. Xehanort tallies in midair and finally settles on his number. 13 lifetimes is what it would take to rebuild the world. And a 14th. One last lifetime for the curious Xehanort to explore this brand new world. This scene is perhaps our biggest hint as to the future of the Kingdom Hearts series, and because I intend to continue discussing Xehanort's life in this chronological manner, I will expand upon exactly what this is implying a little later on, but surmise it to say that I think Xehanort's extraordinary dream will one day be realized. As for Ericus's dream, he simply wants to stay true to the light. Should anyone lose themselves in the darkness, Ericus wants to be there as a beacon to guide them home. Master Odin had shone a light that cut through the darkness and saved both his and Xehanort's lives. And perhaps with a warm, supportive light, instead of the depressive force of loneliness, Baldr would not have been irreversibly lost to his own darkness. And while these events may have played a part in formulating Ericus's dream, I think that deep down, he knows that his best friend Xehanort is someone who walks a road close to that dark path. And should Xehanort ever lose his way, Ericus wants to be there as a waypoint to guide him back to the light. This is the very same dream I mentioned earlier, the one that I can only infer that Xehanort was able to read within Ericus's heart 2 years prior, showing that Ericus's commitment to ensuring his best friend stays safe within the light and does not succumb to the darkness like Baldr did has not wavered after all this time, or throughout any of the things that Ericus saw on his own journey. After another 2 years of training and studying, and with the Mark of Mastery exam finally on the horizon, Xehanort prepared to leave Scala ad Caem once more. On a dark and rainy day, just before his departure, a dejected Xehanort yet again visited the graveyard where his friends and former classmates were symbolically laid to rest to pay his respects, showing that the events that took place those 4 years ago still weighed heavily on Xehanort's mind, and continued to inform his current actions. Ericus also arrives and greets his sullen comrade, trying to get Xehanort to remember the good times with their departed friends. But Xehanort's demeanor is unchanging, even as Ericus continues to extend an olive branch by saying that he doesn't have to go anywhere, and that what happened to these people wasn't Xehanort's fault. Clearly, Ericus has observed quite a shift in his friend over the past 2 years, as any trace of that curious and naive boy he once was is gone, and a permanent scowl now constantly adorns Xehanort's face. A potent cocktail of emotions must be constantly mulling within Xehanort at this point. The weight of his ever-present prophesized burden to somehow save the world from chaos, the awful implications of just what saving the world would require him to do, plus the constant and deeply personal reminders of what could happen if those with the power to make a change in the world lacked the conviction to do what was necessary. Xehanort does not place any of these worries on Ericus's shoulders, and simply states that he wants to see more of what's out there before the Mark of Mastery exam. But Ericus is a little confused and concerned. Haven't they already spent a year seeing what's out there? What isn't Xehanort telling him? What is Xehanort truly looking for? Xehanort has no answer for these questions, and begins leaving the graveyard to commence his departure. But Ericus calls out through the rain that Xehanort had better return. The pair have a score to settle after all. Ericus is about 200 losses behind Xehanort in chess, and by the sounds of things, he intends to even the score, no matter how far behind Ericus and his light pieces are, or how many times he has tried and failed before. Xehanort turns around to correct Ericus's arithmetic, and upon seeing his best friend's face, there it is. A glimmer of light and hope has broken through the turbulent dark clouds that obscure Xehanort's heart. Xehanort questions if Ericus really means what he said. Was Xehanort truly not to blame for his classmates' deaths? Could he still remain here, standing beside the light after all that had happened? Had he not already walked too far down this dark road? With all the turmoil that Xehanort faces, he has almost forgotten that Ericus will always believe in him, always be there for him no matter what. With some common ground finally found between the pair, Ericus bids Xehanort well on his journey, knowing that Xehanort will always have a beacon of light to show him the way home. We only see one instance of what Xehanort witnessed while on this latest journey through the worlds, as he allowed himself to be captured and dragged before Wonderland's Queen of Hearts once more. Xehanort was charged with trespassing and willfully disturbing Her Majesty's peace, exactly as his classmates had been accused of 4 years prior. Perhaps Xehanort attacked some Heartless to get the guards' attention in the same way that they had. The Queen is predictably infuriated by Xehanort's transgressions, but surprisingly, she doesn't recognize him, even after their 2 prior encounters. It has been 4 years from Xehanort's point of view, but, as we discussed earlier, time flows differently from one world relative to the next. We can assume that because Sora, and then Roxas, will visit Wonderland about 70 years from now to find the Queen of Hearts and all her subjects within it alive and well, that time must be flowing extremely slowly in this world, relative to what we can assume is the true flow of time throughout the realm of light. So what I'm getting at here is, though it has been 4 years from Xehanort's perspective, barely any time is likely to have passed for the Queen of Hearts at all, which makes it even more interesting that she does not seem to remember one of the mysterious outsiders who stormed into her courtroom twice and caused an enormous ruckus a relatively short time ago. Xehanort is surprised by the Queen's amnesia, but upon peering into the Queen of Hearts' heart, he observes that darkness has once again taken root within. This is apparently precisely the outcome that Xehanort anticipated seeing, a confirmation of the last 2 years of studying and the reason for his journey to the outside worlds once more. Xehanort smiles to himself as the Queen once again demonstrates her wrath, and he confidently strides up to the courtroom podium to receive his sentence. So despite destroying a physical embodiment of the darkness in the Queen's heart not once, but twice 4 years prior, only a short time later, once again the woman's heart overflowed with darkness. So why does this information not only not surprise Xehanort, but even seem to make him happy? I absolutely have thoughts about this, but maybe I'll elaborate on them a little later. Just as she had delivered the first time, I'm sure the verdict for Xehanort's latest crimes was also guilty, but clearly Xehanort did not allow himself to receive the capital punishment that the Queen felt he deserved. Perhaps he had to battle yet another Heartless embodying the sin of wrath, or maybe he merely portaled out of the world after his hypothesis was confirmed. Xehanort might have even journeyed to more worlds as part of this latest pursuit of knowledge, but we do not get to see anything that happened immediately following this scene. But what we can surmise is that in the 2 years that followed, the youth eventually returned home, and after 6 years had passed since the main events of Kingdom Hearts Dark Road, it is implied that Xehanort and Ericus' Mark of Mastery exam was finally conducted by Master Odin. The curious, enigmatic old man with a yet unknown agenda, seen wielding both a blade associated with darkness and another of light in equal measure, eventually named the pair as Keyblade Masters, and passed one of those ancient blades onto each of his inheritors respectively. But Xehanort believed that though both friends had been granted the title of Master, only Ericus, new wielder of the Master Defender and known descendant of a long lineage of Keyblade wielders, was Master Odin's true successor and heir. Xehanort would later write about this time period in his 8th report, wherein he also discussed Ericus' refusal to sway from the absolute perspective of light being the only path forward to protecting the world, and darkness in all its forms being a non-negotiable evil. But in all the years since he first arrived in Scarlet Adkayan, and through all the countless encounters with light and darkness that he had seen throughout his life, Xehanort's perspective had become more nuanced. He believed that light and darkness should exist in harmony, in balance with each other, and that too much of that darkness had been stamped out of these light-filled worlds for their own good. I've written about 4 more pages of discussion here on this topic, but it's very much outside of the scope of this video, so I'll do my best to summarize, and post the rest of that script on my Patreon. Essentially, I almost wonder if Xehanort has realized that in the aftermath of the Keyblade War, where every world now exists as a discrete little pocket of almost pure light sequestered amongst an ocean of darkness, the intended harmony of the universe has been completely shattered. Darkness is forbidden from existing, and yet, as a natural component of this universe, exist it will continue to do, cropping up particularly strongly in the hearts of certain people in each world. These people almost always disrupt the balance of a world ruled by light, constantly causing chaos and claiming lives as they clash against the unbalanced nature of their world, and are destined to be dispatched in the name of the light by various heroes, almost like some sort of sacrificial lambs that soak up all the darkness of these worlds and need to be periodically purged. Ultimately, such chaos could very easily again lead to the destruction of all worlds, as it very nearly did a few years prior at Baldr's hands. Unless, of course, someone stood up and made an incredibly difficult, but ultimately necessary and beneficial choice. And as both one of the few remaining Keyblade Masters in the world, and supposedly the prophesized Child of Destiny, perhaps Xehanort alone possessed the right to dictate the future of the worlds. 1 year after being pronounced a Keyblade Master and inheriting the no-name Keyblade, Xehanort approached his good friend and fellow master Ericus with a proposal. The pair should summon Kingdom Hearts and purge the worlds. Baldr would have used this destructive power to usher in a world ruled by darkness, and the cycle would have only repeated itself once more, this time with light chaotically fighting for its own existence. But with a wielder of light and darkness united at the helm, together they would tear down the tyranny of light, and hope for a new world of light and darkness in equal measure to be created from the ashes. After everything Xehanort had experienced, endured, and been led to believe, he wished to create a world in which there would be no more conflict between light and darkness. This is how the Child of Destiny would save the world. But just as the deceased upperclassman had urged the pair to do years prior, the two friends had indeed broadened their horizons and taken much from their experiences, arriving at two extremely different perspectives as a result. Because Ericus, of course, was unwilling to budge on his worldview even a little, and rejected Xehanort's proposition. I find it hard to blame the boy, having been brought up since birth to believe that darkness in all its forms is the definition of evil, and seeing firsthand the carnage wrought by a being of darkness that was attempting to do the very thing that Xehanort was proposing now. Xehanort spoke sincerely, claiming that this is what his experience has taught him was the best path to protect the world, and that he did not come to this decision easily. But Ericus is unconvinced, and demands to know how Xehanort can be so sure that the drastic measure of summoning Kingdom Hearts is the correct method to protect the world. How would one go about explaining the burden placed upon oneself as a child, that it was their destiny to save the world from darkness? How could he explain that he felt the path to this outcome already etched upon his heart, and that he had no choice but to follow it? Maybe Xehanort can't quite put the feelings into words, because his only answer is to ask how Ericus can be so certain that his solution is not correct in return. Ericus appears sad and lost in thought for a moment, before readying his blade. After everything that Ericus has experienced, allowing someone this close to the darkness to summon Kingdom Hearts would surely be a disaster for the world. As a Keyblade Master, no. As Xehanort's true friend, Ericus must put a stop to him and show him the way back to the light. The two masters leapt into the air as the clash of their weapons rang out, Xehanort's first true step towards enacting his plans of summoning Kingdom Hearts, that would eventually lead to the Keyblade War seen in Kingdom Hearts 3, a cruel reflection of a similar clash between masters that signaled the beginning of the previous Keyblade War, all those years ago. Ericus's words, "Life has taught us far different lessons," could very well serve as the thesis statement of Dark Road's entire story. Perspective is everything. The same events, witnessed by the same two people, in the same place and at the same time, were interpreted in two diametrically opposed ways. In this example, because of the witnesses' wildly different perspectives on darkness and light. Xehanort would devote the rest of his life to his interpretation, and Ericus was equally ready to give his own life to ensure that Xehanort would never see that vision through. In his 8th report, Xehanort described this moment, noting that he and Ericus did not see eye to eye, and after this encounter, he left to wander the worlds, feeling true freedom for the first time since he stepped through the portal at Destiny Islands and escaped his childhood home for the worlds outside. But free to do what? How would he achieve his goals, especially without the blessing and aid of Ericus? Over the next several decades, the curious Xehanort would research many subjects, including the mysteries of the Keyblades, with such knowledge leading him to uncover more about the ancient Keyblade War and eventually to discovering the legend of the fabled Keyblade itself, a weapon with which one could not only summon Kingdom Hearts, but also unlock and truly master its incredible power. With such a blade in his hands, Xehanort would not be merely at the mercy of Kingdom Hearts to blindly purge the worlds and hope for the best, but truly in command to wield its power and recreate the world exactly as he saw fit. With 47 years of time and research to reinforce his beliefs behind him, Xehanort once again returned to Ericus's special inherited dominion, the Land of Departure, with a new offer. Would Ericus help Xehanort as he completed his grand task of obtaining the Keyblade? With this mighty key, Xehanort sought to first summon Kingdom Hearts, and then open every imaginable door to every world, beckoning whatever remaining Keyblade wielders still existed across these scattered worlds, knowing that they would flock together to battle over ownership of this precious power. The resultant battle would once again enact another apocalyptically destructive toll onto all worlds, reducing the already fragile lands of light to rubble, and with the power of Kingdom Hearts under Xehanort's command, he would recreate the world from the darkness that seeped in to fill the voids. Creation born from ruin, an entirely new world existing in a perfect equilibrium of darkness and light, one that the curious Xehanort could not wait to explore. As we see in Dark Road, and as we saw a decade earlier in Birth by Sleep, Ericus was willing to give his life to ensure that his old friend Xehanort would not be allowed to go through with this drastic plan, and after his words failed to dissuade Xehanort from his life's work, Ericus charged recklessly at Xehanort as the visitors strode away. But with a simple motion, Xehanort unleashed the power of darkness upon his childhood ally, scarring his face permanently with its tinged and corrosive power. For the first time, Ericus could see that the darkness had truly taken the man he once called a friend, and he only prayed that his act of desperation had been enough to give Xehanort cause to reconsider his plans. 64 years after the main events of Dark Road had concluded, after another decade of planning and exploration, I believe that Master Xehanort has finally learned the method for crafting the Keyblade. The blade was a perfect balance of light and darkness itself, but it was alleged to have split into 20 pieces, 7 of light and 13 of darkness when it shattered. So, if equal powers of light and darkness were to be pit against each other and clash, the Keyblade should be reforged. But Xehanort's body was growing old, too old to see this task through to its fruition. I think at this point, with his goal now so close to finally being attainable after a lifetime of research and work, Xehanort might have reached some level of sentimentality as he looked back upon his life and all that he had done since leaving his tiny island home as a boy. Before he carried out his grand plan, perhaps it was time to indulge in the pursuit of something a little bit closer to the heart, to seek out the very people that he once dreamed of, the people that had inspired Xehanort to leave his island and seek the worlds outside in the first place. It's also very possible that he simply needed an additional pawn to see his plan through, but whatever the reason, Xehanort returned to the magic mirror of the Dwarf Woodlands to ask the magical entity a question. Did those 6 friends ever even exist? And if so, could they be found? The mirror, in its typical non-conventional way, implied that indeed, the people that Xehanort dreamed of did exist, and though some lay beyond this world and time, there were some that could be found here and now, describing a boy bearing both great light and darkness that had arrived at a location that Xehanort instantly recognized as the Keyblade Graveyard. All those familiar with Union Cross will recall that near the end of that story, after Ven had recaptured one of the 13 ancient darknesses back within his heart, Brain sent Lorium, Arena, and the unconscious Ven forward into the future to destinations unknown. As per the rules of time travel, they were reduced to mere hearts as they voyaged through time, and required a waypoint, someone with memories of them, and a medium to rebuild their bodies with in order to become completely whole again. I can only surmise that Xehanort's act of seeking out and learning Ven's location may have sufficed as Ven's waypoint here. The fact that someone was opening their heart and reaching out for any trace of their 6 friends may have been enough for Ven to unknowingly latch onto and allow him to arrive in this time. Union Cross made the effort to show the audience that the wind was blowing in the Keyblade graveyard at the moment of Ven's arrival, which is a somewhat overlooked detail about this world, apart from all the tornadoes of course, but it's a detail worth noticing when you compare his arrival scene to Lauriam and Aurena's, which show that pair have rematerialized in a field of flowers and in a lightning storm respectively. Presumably, the developers would therefore like the audience to infer that these people were somehow reformed in their respective locations by using one of these elements as their medium, which matches what we associate them with throughout the rest of the series. So, I'll admit that it's a bit of a reach, but given that cinematically, we are shown several scenes of people arriving in the future after successfully traveling through time back to back, first Maleficent through her robe, then Lauriam in the flowers, then Aurena in the lightning. 3 scenes that show particular focus on elements that we can reasonably assume to be the Traveler's mediums. I don't think it's too far out of the realm of possibility to assume that the wind helped reform Ven as his medium. Wind is practically his namesake after all, an element he most closely associates with apart from light, and it's not like there is anything else in this immediate vicinity that could have helped. The actual Keyblade graveyard part of the Keyblade graveyard is a bit further away, and the earth Ven is lying on is more of that other guy's thing. Although, immediately following those aforementioned cutscenes, another starts to play. And this scene shows that Ven's arrival point does seem to be at the exact spot that a certain someone, a someone that I don't think is Luciu, is shown to be walking through and pause at, with the infamous black box in hand, at some currently unknown point in time. Aside from lifting his hood to reveal a face identical to Brain's, we have not yet seen what happens immediately following this moment. Why exactly this person is here, and chose to lift up their hood and affirm their goals at this time. If said someone were to then influence the spot in some way, maybe by burying the black box here, who knows, but maybe whatever reason this cloaked individual was here has something to do with why Ven's heart arrived and reformed his body at the exact time that perfectly aligned with Master Xehanort's moment of introspection and future ambitions. Ven is said to be the one foretold to carry darkness into the future after all. His departure and arrival should have been witnessed by Luciu and Xehanort respectively, and, as they were each wielders of the no-name Keyblade at those times, those moments should therefore be recorded in the Book of Prophecies. This has gotten very far off the rails for a simple tangent. Let's somewhat happily resign to thinking of the wind as Ven's medium until any further information contradicts this, and move on. As for Ven's memories, Xehanort has already displayed the ability to recall segments of a conversation from the ancient past because of his connection to the player, and in that very same conversation that he recalled in Wonderland, the name Ventus and Ven were spoken. I think that Ven would at least be able to recall his own name because Xehanort would have been able to provide Ven with that fragment of his own memory, but because no one else in this time retained any memories of Ventus from his time in Union Cross, essentially every other memory about his life prior to time traveling would be completely lost to him, making the boy little better than a complete amnesiac when he arrived in this time. It's also worth noting that the darkness that Ven absorbed into his heart came along for the journey through time, and that its presence may also be a factor in deciding where and when Ven arrived. Hypothetically, Maleficent could also be acting as a waypoint for the time travelers as well, but I can't say with any certainty if she's relevant in this case. Either way, Xehanort discovered that one of the people from his childhood dreams was indeed real, and took the young boy on as an apprentice Keyblade wielder. Xehanort would write in his reports that the boy was too young to inhabit as a vessel, but with the tremendous darkness coursing within him, the boy was a perfect candidate to serve in his other purposes. He would forcibly extract the darkness within Ventus's heart, creating a new being that would be known as Vanitas. The process very nearly killed Ventus, and Xehanort took the dying boy that he once dreamed of to the very island home in which he once dreamed of him. However, Ven's injured heart was able to reach out and connect with another, and the light of the unborn Saurus heart called back and filled in the blank space in Ven's heart that had been torn out to create Vanitas, influencing how that being would appear in the future. Slight detour aside, Xehanort now had his heart of pure light and pure darkness, and he reached out to his old friend Ericus to ask that he care for Ventus as he recovered. Xehanort travelled the corridors of darkness with the injured Ven following in tow, his recovering heart completely sealed off from the darkness through Sora's protection. Xehanort also no longer feared the darkness, walking these corridors without the protection of a black coat, just as the Master of Masters had predicted that he would. As the pair travelled, Xehanort recalled the journey his own guardian had taken when he left Scala ad Caem and travelled to the Destiny Islands through these same corridors, with the baby Xehanort swaddled in only a blanket for protection in their arms. He then says something rather interesting, that Xehanort's mentor, the reincarnated player and protagonist of Missing Link, had, among other things, taught Xehanort that the one inscribed in the book, the one chosen to be a dark vessel, can connect their heart to others and feel what they feel. In his continuing lifelong attempt to live up to the prophecy his mentor spoke of, Xehanort then outstretches his arms, actively embracing and connecting to the hearts of darkness that flood these corridors, in the hopes that he might finally be found worthy of his supposedly destined role. As Xehanort and the barely responsive Ventus arrive in the Land of Departure, they are greeted by Master Ericus, who takes Xehanort aside and leaves Ven with Terra and Aqua. We have seen the three disciples' conversation before in Birth by Sleep, but Dark Road allows the audience to hear Xehanort attempting to apologize to Ericus, before asking Ericus to take Ventus into his care. Xehanort says that he stands too closely to the darkness, and tells Ericus that Ventus could be the child of destiny, letting us know that Ericus is also aware of this prophecy. But, this has to be a lie, right? Xehanort might suspect that Ven could fit the description, but surely he still believes himself to be the one his guardian spoke of, even though that belief might be wavering after all these decades of perceived unrealized potential. Xehanort is also no stranger to lying to those he wishes to manipulate, in order to get them to behave how he desires. His interactions with Terra and Ericus throughout all of Birth by Sleep should give us little reason to trust him here. But what if he's not lying? Xehanort does already know that Ven is special in some way, having seen Ven in his childhood dreams, and he can probably peer into Ven's heart even now and see the miracle that has taken place within it. A miracle that occurred when the boy connected his heart with another's on the Destiny Islands. This gave Ven another chance at life from the clutches of death, a birth by sleep if you will, meaning this child with a heart of pure light that can verifiably connect that heart with others has effectively begun a new life that started on these islands. These are all factors that mean Ven fits convincingly into Xehanort's former mentor's prophecy. Let's put a pin in this for a moment because, lie or not, the statement is enough to convince Ericus to take Ven on as a pupil. But the pair don't have any more chances to chat, as Ven can be heard bellowing out in pain from the entrance hall. As we saw in Birth by Sleep, Terra and Aqua's questioning about Ventus's past has caused the amnesiac boy tremendous pain. After offloading Ventus, Xehanort made to leave the Land of Departure when he was approached by Vanitas, who essentially asked if Ven was alright. Xehanort didn't answer the being, and Vanitas brushed Ven off, glad that the pair were rid of him. But Xehanort surprisingly says that he did all this for Ventus, not for Vanitas. Extracting the darkness from the boy's heart and leaving him to be raised under Ericus' guidance were apparently not only means to the end of creating the clash between light and darkness that Xehanort sought, but acts of mercy as well. Perhaps Xehanort intervened to prevent Ventus from the pain of harboring such a darkness within his heart, or to ensure that Ven could not be the fated one from the prophecy of the Child of Destiny if his heart was no longer entangled with darkness, or was sealed off from connecting with any further hearts. If Ventus no longer possessed the supposed capabilities of the Child of Destiny, then perhaps such a frail child as Ven would be spared the burden of saving the world. A burden that Xehanort felt only he was convicted enough to see through, no matter what terrible sacrifices such a role would surely require. Giving Xehanort a somewhat sympathetic backstory that informs his misguided lifelong goals through Dark Road, whilst also having to acknowledge and account for his particularly evil deeds seen in Birth by Sleep, was always going to be a challenge for the writers. But telling us now that Xehanort was somehow doing Ventus a kindness by nearly killing him is definitely one of the tougher revisionist pills to swallow. So I'm interested to hear your interpretations as to why Xehanort would disclose such information to Vanitas at this time. Vanitas accused Xehanort of switching sides, to which Xehanort responded by reminding the young upstart who exactly wielded the bigger Keyblade around here, before he began to probe the newly created Vanitas for information about the 13 ancient darknesses. He demonstrated a remarkable amount of knowledge about the true fate of the 13, knowing that the most powerful 7 were to be trapped within the Lost Masters, that 4 more were contained within the worlds of data, and, just like Master Odin had said earlier, knew the rumor that 2 more were said to have been destroyed when Daybreak Town crumbled. But Xehanort somehow also knows the actual truth, that one of those two remaining darknesses hid within a wielder of the light. He teases Vanitas with this information, poking and prodding the being and seemingly attempting to get him to admit that he actually is one of the 13 ancient darknesses of legend. Xehanort wonders what reason one of these darknesses would have to stay incognito in this time. Do they fear the light, or something else entirely? Xehanort finishes by saying that his meeting with Ventus was no accident, that this was a fated encounter, which causes Vanitas to coldly ask, what exactly does Xehanort know about all of this? Because the 13 darknesses knew that Ventus was their chosen vessel. A darkness accompanying Ventus into the future was written into the Book of Prophecies, and that book ends by revealing that darkness will ultimately prevail and the light expire. So surely they want to follow the words of this book to the letter. But is there even more to this going on? Does the fact that Xehanort seems to have cottoned on to more information than he should know worry the darknesses? Could there be further irons in the fire that this knowledge would threaten? Xehanort playfully asks, what is there to know? Refusing to show any more of his hand, and Vanitas drops the subject, following Xehanort as the pair departed this world. Now, Xehanort was probably told stories of these events as a child by his guardian, and even may have dreamed of this exact moment where Ven reclaimed the darkness that had possessed his body. But it's interesting to note that Xehanort somehow has even more knowledge of that ancient past now than his own master did 60 years prior. In fact, Kingdom Hearts 3 and Melody of Memory imply that he may have a level of foresight and knowledge far beyond what we, the audience, were privy to. And I think it's interesting that Dark Road took the time to show us that Xehanort knew these things, and that one of the darknesses was concerned by this. This visit to the Land of Departure was the first time Xehanort had laid eyes on Terra, and here, he observed the pupil's lingering darkness within his heart. Perhaps Xehanort even felt some level of pity for the boy, a youth much like Baldr and his own younger self that was taught to reject and demonize that natural occurrence within his heart. But regardless, Terra was the perfect vessel with which to enact the final stage of Xehanort's plan. We have finally reached the end of what Dark Road's cutscenes directly cover, and from here, the plot of Birth by Sleep and the Kingdom Hearts series at large plays out as normal. Sometime later, after Xehanort had begun infecting the worlds with Unversed via Vanitas, Ericus invited Xehanort to witness as he anointed Terra and Aqua as true Keyblade Masters. Xehanort took this perfect opportunity to prey upon Ericus's flawed ideology, drawing attention to the abundant darkness he had previously witnessed within Terra's heart. Darkness that, quote, was just waiting to be awakened. After experiencing the tragedy of the heartbreaking awakening of the darkness within Baldr's heart firsthand, Ericus was all too willing to take on Xehanort's suggestion that the two pupils be tested for the Mark of Mastery, just as Xehanort and Ericus were themselves back in the day. Terra's own instilled insecurities about the darkness in his heart are preyed upon, and he leaves Ericus's protection in an attempt to prove himself, finding comfort in Xehanort's acceptance. Ven is similarly manipulated into leaving the Land of Departure by Vanitas, growing stronger until he stands on equal measure with his darker half. And Aqua is also burdened with an awful task by Ericus in the name of the light, serving as a further example that faults can be found even in the most faithful of devotees. And everything the old friends had learned and experienced throughout the events of Dark Road would lead to an ultimate climax, as Ericus is forced to make a horrible decision for the good of the worlds. Once he realized that Xehanort intended to go through with his plans of forging the Keyblade, Ericus would have the choice to destroy Ventus rather than let Xehanort succeed. And whereas the younger Ericus was unable to go through with such a terrible choice as a child, the older and hardened adult possessed the conviction. Terra's intervention spared Ven's life and knocked some sense into Ericus, but then Xehanort showed that he too was willing to make a monstrous sacrifice in the name of achieving his goals. Weakened, and with his back turned, Ericus, Xehanort's oldest friend, and perhaps the one man that knew what Xehanort was truly capable of, was struck down by his former lifelong ally. But instead of departing this world entirely, Ericus performed a trick he had seen years prior by Hoda, allowing his heart to remain in the land of the living a little longer as it sheltered within Terra's. A mysterious man had offered to assist Xehanort with his schemes along the way, and finally, at the Keyblade graveyard, technically 7 Keyblade wielders would assemble. They would battle in Xehanort's first of many carefully planned attempts to claim the power of Kingdom Hearts for himself, in order to purge what he saw as a broken world beyond repair, and build something in balance anew. For this was supposedly his destiny, to save the world from darkness by doing what no one else was willing to do. Someone strong who possessed the fortitude to make terrible choices in order to dictate the future for the weak. He had been taught this since birth, and his lifetime's worth of experiences only served to reinforce those beliefs. But only after actually achieving his goal, with the legendary Keyblade finally in his hand and the purge begun, did Xehanort finally see the error of his ways. An incredible boy, who had once seemed so dull and ordinary, managed to triumph over him and challenge his beliefs through the power of his friends. A boy who also hailed from the Destiny Islands, who connected his heart with the hearts of many others, and countless times had saved the world from darkness. A boy who believed the worlds and their people were worth fighting for, and part of a larger generation that didn't reject the darkness on principle, but had even found ways to coexist and healthily embrace it. Perhaps this child, who believed and accepted that destiny was beyond any one person's control, was the right person to entrust the future to. And perhaps the curious Xehanort will even get a chance to explore whatever future that boy might help create. And with that, I think I have fully explored the story of Kingdom Hearts Dark Road for now. I hope I have really explored why I like this story so much, and how much I feel it enhances the story of so many other games in the series, particularly the climax of Kingdom Hearts 3. The Disney integration also felt very well utilised in this game as well, and I hope that continues in Kingdom Hearts 4, as it did in many ways during Kingdom Hearts 3. I'd like to eventually explain the entire series in my style, and I think Birth by Sleep would be the next logical place to go to continue things chronologically, so let me know if you would like to see that. Anyway, I'll leave you here for now. Please consider subscribing if you enjoyed. All the best. Bye bye.